along this morning to the Welsh Ambulance Service NHS Trust board meeting here in Ponfrenna. So the first item is apologies. We have apologies from our chair, Colin Dennis. Hugh Parry, Ian, you're here in Hugh's stead. Hannah Rowan and Paul Hollard. Any other apologies? We good? We are correct. We've checked. Claire, welcome. Haven't seen you for some time. Look forward to having our discussion later on. We will have some other attendees in the closed session later on. This is a board meeting held in public. It's not a public meeting as such, so it's for people to see how we go about business and how we do business rather than to ask questions in an open sort of meeting. We will be having a closed meeting this afternoon. The closed meeting is nothing other than to ensure that we can, prior to making that material public, deal with confidential matters and commercial sensitive matters in a way that's appropriate and applies the governance that comes with that. Any declarations of interest over and above those declared? No. Okay. Thank you very much. In that case, we move to item 3. The minutes of the last meeting. Don't propose to go through them page by page. I think with all the papers today, we'll assume that the papers are read. So if there's anything to be drawn out of them, that's fine. The other thing I should mention is that the committees of the board have undertaken significant scrutiny of the papers that we will receive today, but it must be remembered that not every member of the board is a member of every committee. So there may well be new questions or questions for clarification that come from people that are not within the committee with the board paper, the committee paper being presented at that time. So minutes of the last meeting. Is there anything that anyone wants to bring up that's not on the agenda that is of particular relevance to today's agenda? Just have a quick look around. No? Okay. So we're asked to approve those minutes. Are we happy to approve? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Matters arising. There was the one item on the action log, which I think fell to you, Rachel.
Yes, so that is work in progress.
Yeah.
Yes, so I've got a final description yet. I have had very brief discussions with Angie when we were in the car on the way back from industrial action last week on potential options. But yeah, that's going to remain open if we can.
Open for the time being. So with potentially, an update in March. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. Thanks very much. The next item is item 5, which is the chair's report. Clearly, I'm not the chair. Colin Dennis is the chair, and he's on leave at the moment. I just report he's been to the full round of ministerial chairs and chief executives meetings that you would expect him to have been to, and has reported back to the board appropriately. The chief executive and I attended a meeting with the minister on Tuesday of last week to update on December's performance and a number of other issues, along with the Emergency Ambulance Services Committee Chair and the Chief Ambulance Service Commissioner. Those are ongoing. I take this opportunity to formally acknowledge and congratulate Ed O'Brien on receiving the King's Ambulance Medal in the New Year's Honours List, and also our former Executive Director of Nursing, Claire Bevan, on her OBE in the New Year's Honours List as well. So Ed is one of the first KAMs of a new generation. So a bit of history as we go forward. And the last thing I'd like to say, just while I have the opportunity here, is to acknowledge the effort of everybody in the organisation in what's a really challenging and difficult time for all sorts of reasons. Particularly acknowledge the leadership that our executives provide, particularly around this table, and the service that our people provide out in the community and in the challenging environments that are not necessarily seen in light of, in patient-facing terms, but nonetheless are really important in making the organisation run as efficiently as it can against the challenges that are evident and high profile across the country. Thank you. So item 6, Jason, it's your Chief Executive's report. As usual, I think you'll probably draw out the pertinent issues within the report, which is, as usual, very detailed and raises the challenges that you and your team undoubtedly face.
Great, thanks, Kevin. So as usual, the report is there. I'm going to draw out just 5 items today, and then of course happy to take any questions. The report being, as Kevin's mentioned, comprehensive and covering the full range of activities of the trust since we last met. If we can go to paragraph 3 first, and the bottom dot point on in paragraph 3, whilst we will receive a presentation from Angie and Lee on industrial action later on, I just want to say a few words here, and that is, of course, we've had 4 days now of industrial action in the EMS service, in addition to which we've had industrial action affecting us in the 111 service from the Royal College of Nursing. Those 4 days, 2 for GMB, 2 for Unite, and Unison has a reballot which will close on the 16th of February. So we await those results in a couple of weeks' time. Largely, the industrial action has gone to plan. We had a conversation in the partnership forum with all of the senior trade union representatives yesterday. Whilst I say gone to plan, what I mean is that the operational planning that Lee and his team and others have undertaken has enabled the action to take place in a safe way. Conversations with senior trade union colleagues and the operations team to get to a point where trade unions can agree a set of derogations or exemptions from the industrial action have developed well, and those exemptions, together with the additional mitigations that have been developed, have enabled thus far broadly safe services to continue through the industrial action. We'll hear more about the activity and the impact of that in the presentation from Lee and Angie later on. The tone, I just want to talk quickly, given this is our first formal board meeting since the industrial action started, I just want to talk quickly about the tone that I'm setting, or we're setting, for the industrial action. Board members will largely probably have heard me talking about this, extensively in the media in the last few weeks. But essentially, what we're seeking to do here is recognising the individual rights that our people have, our staff have, trade union members have, to take industrial action once a legally constituted ballot and mandate exists. So we recognise and respect the right that our people have to take that action. We're seeking to enable that action whilst seeking to strike the delicate balance with operating safe services. And I think setting the right tone early has been important for me in this, because I do expect this to be a long haul. I don't expect this to be over by the end of this month. There's no sign of that thus far. And so setting the right tone early, I think, has been crucial for us. And certainly feedback that we've had from extensive visits to picket lines and discussions with staff across the organisation and their trade union representatives is, whilst there have been some little operational niggles that we've responded to on the day, largely the tone has been right, I think. I mean, trade union colleagues might want to offer a comment there, but we're seeking to recognise the rights our people have and the difficult choices they're making about, to strike or not to, supporting them in whatever choice that our people make, but equally seeking to get the balance right between that and operating the safest service we can during the disruption, which is significant to operational delivery. You just want to comment, Dave?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jason. I mean, yeah, it's very difficult times. Obviously, we're sitting here on behalf of the trade unions, but we're all separate unions. We appreciate the support the trust has sort of lent in respect of making sure that everybody is okay and getting through what needs to be done. And yeah, just I guess like most, we're hoping this will get resolved as soon as possible. Yeah, thanks very much for the support, and we'll continue to work together to hopefully get through this. Thank you.
Can I just offer a comment there? I think it's important, Jason and Damon and Ian, that I think I speak for certainly the non-exec colleagues here, that the professionalism that's been shown in this thus far is exemplary, and we do not want to get away from that. It's really important for everybody. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So if we can then just press on paragraph 10 in the fleet section, talks about the fleet replacement program business justification case, put my teeth in, and just over £15 million worth of capital support from government to continue the fleet replacement program, which is good news, and signals that our fleet size will remain the same, but we will replace the oldest vehicles again this year, as we have done in many years before, to keep the fleet fresh and operationally ready. And you'll see there in some of the other paragraphs, we're adjusting the fleet mix, moving more towards electric vehicles where we can this year, certainly in the car fleet, to support our decarbonisation agenda. Paragraph 26 talks about electronic case card, and whilst not specifically relevant to this particular paragraph, I just want to draw the board's attention to the fact that we are now starting to use the data from about a year's worth of use of the electronic case card now to review how we respond to activity. So we know that in some cases the 999 triage process is oversensitive or over triages perhaps compared to what we actually find on scene. And what we're seeking to do now is begin to use this rich data that emerges from the transition to an electronic patient care record to in time inform what we do, particularly with the strategy and our moves towards changing, and improving how we respond in a more targeted way to specific individual patient needs. So starting to use the emerging data in a very different way than we've been able to before with paper-based records. Paragraph 43 talks about dementia and reminiscence therapy interactive activities, or RITA as it's known, and the board will be pleased to read the paragraph here that our dementia team have recently been the recipient of an award for the most innovative use of RITA in our vehicles and supporting patients with dementia, particularly when delayed in the vehicle outside the emergency department for long periods of time. So great stuff going on here. Really innovative, I think, use of some of the technology that we've got, and I'm very much looking forward to much more of this supporting that vulnerable patient group. And then finally, paragraph 70 talks about improvements in our community first responder scheme with the rollout of pain relief for the first time. Stage 1 of that is underway, and there is will be, highly likely there will be, further pain relief opportunities made available to CFRs in the coming weeks. So this is a big step forward as supporting community first responders in their work and being able to provide better care for patients in the community. So, Kevin, I'll stop there, but happy to take any questions on the paper as ever.
Looking around, couple of comments, if I may. I think the paragraph 26, the info on the coding, if that then influences, the info on the data,
yeah,
if that influences coding in a more positive way that impacts it, obviously, it's the right thing to do, isn't it? And I guess that's working with the academy to change coding, is it?
It possibly will be. I mean, we need to see how it develops.
Yeah.
We need to see how it develops. But now we've got the opportunity now with a much richer data set to be able to understand more about what's actually happening at the scene rather than relying solely on the original coding.
And on the descriptor that influences the coding.
Yeah.
Okay. And then paragraph 44, that's brilliant news. It plays to a really challenging demographic that's just not going to go away. So it's really important that we optimize it, all the opportunities there. I think that's really important. And it will surprise no one to see to hear that I think paragraph 70 is a great way forward in terms of analgesia in the out of hospital space, even if it's I'll leave it there.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Brendan, I think you wanted to come in on the EPCR point.
Yeah, just on the academy. So I reached out to connections in the academy, and they're very interested because they recognise that globally they have an issue with the respiratory coding, and so they've offered us the use of a data analyst from working with Priority Dispatch. So we will be linking into them, so we will be able to access some of their global information. They're very interested in what we're doing with our code 6 problems.
So West becomes a global game changer again. Great.
Possibly, yeah.
Thank you.
We like global first.
Yeah, we do. Kerry.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to congratulate the safeguarding team actually in paragraph 41. Some really excellent progress and marking the 10th anniversary there. But the question I wanted to ask was going back to the ECPR, and based on my own experience on going on a ride out, actually, it's around the connectivity, when paramedics are in the home, and I saw firsthand actually the value of pulling out the patient history. But obviously there appeared to be some challenges around connectivity in a couple of scenes. So I just wondered how that was going.
Yeah, Brendan, Leanne, do you want to comment on this?
From the connectivity, the piece of work that is going forward at the moment is the connection to the GP clinical record, the GP summary, which we're piloting now with the APPs in North Wales. We'll be meeting up with GPC Wales shortly, and that will provide us, hopefully if the pilot works well, that will actually complete all of the connectivity that we need. Now, as to the actual specifics of how it's working, I'm not too sure. Maybe Leanne.
Yeah, I can say that from planning for next year, so how we continue with the EPCR integrations and rollout, we're aligning our roadmaps with DHCW to make sure that that kind of national connectivity is there. So the GP record will be part one. There are various other systems that we want to be able to integrate with, and also surface more at ED as well, so that handover, so there will be more information available on scene for paramedics and clinicians with the patient, but also then passing that information further down into the system.
So it feels like any issues that exist are going to be ironed out in the next 12 months, or
clinically the connections have all been made. Whether there are specific areas where they have difficulty getting a signal, I don't know. The biggest problem is the fact that we don't have one straightforward interface with the emergency departments in Wales, because they've built different systems. Now, that should be changing, which will make things simpler. But there are only two GP systems, so it's relatively simple for us to make the connections back into that system.
I think Kevin, the other thing to say on it was that there was always a development, kind of post-implementation development phase, if that makes sense. So the basic product was rolled out in a phased way, and then there was a development phase afterwards, if you like, to make all of those connections which Brendan has just discussed. So I mean that's kind of coming to fruition now.
Yeah,
currently available in North Wales. So
yeah.
Assuming that goes well, then there's a rollout of that connectivity across the rest of the service to come.
The implementation program will finish at the end of March, at which point it'll become business as usual. So the closure reports will be coming through the executive team shortly.
Okay, thanks. We'll move on. Just on item 5, I should have mentioned we did also have a board development day yesterday, in which we looked at the IMTP and financial sustainability in detail, just for the record. The next item, Estelle, is questions from members of the public. Just wondering whether we had any. We hadn't earlier.
No, at this point, Chair, we haven't had any questions from members of the public. In the event that any are posted via the various viewing portals, so Facebook and Zoom this morning, we'll take those offline and respond outside the meeting to any questions that come forward.
Okay, great. We'll move on. Jason, we're back to you. The mitigations against avoidable harm.
Thank you, Kevin. So this paper updates the position that the board has previously seen and the action plan that supports it. I don't necessarily plan to talk to the paper because everyone will have read it and colleagues are pretty close to where we are. I suppose the headlines I would just draw out, in the operational context in the EMS service. I'm particularly referring to here is, as we know, December was a particularly difficult month for us, with very high activity, particularly very high red activity as a proportion of overall work. Substantial losses at emergency departments in terms of patient handover delays, reaching in excess of 32,000 hours for the month, which equates to 38% of the entire fleet. But underneath that, what's important to understand is that on certain days and for extended periods on certain days, we saw in excess of 50% of the fleet unavailable to us, delayed at the emergency departments. Of course, what that does is it just creates, it's a queuing theory, a problem. Whilst the fleet is delayed, calls continue to come in, and particularly in a month where we saw excess activity, much more work than we would normally see. So those queues begin to build rapidly and become very long. And so we had substantial numbers of patients waiting a very long time in the community in December, and high use of the clinical safety plan in terms of prioritising our responses to those patients, which we do really need to go to. You and I met with the Minister and discussed December performance a few days ago, but what is pleasing is the pressure has eased since the turn of the new year. And whilst we still have, significant losses at emergency departments, it's probably going to be about 10,000 hours or so less this month compared to last, so somewhere around 22,000 hours. Activity is lower this month, considerably lower this month, which of course is helping us. So together with reduced activity and reduced losses at the emergency department, recognising they still are too long or large, we are seeing quite marked improvement in performance. So the amber median, for argument's sake, has fallen from just about 5 hours 6 weeks ago to under an hour. And that's the first time we've seen that, certainly for probably about 12 months. And we've seen a significant improvement in the red median down from just shy of 11 minutes to just over 7. So significant improvements in patient experience and operational performance in the last few weeks, principally as a result of the pressure easing around us. But of course, you know, we're not getting complacent with that. There is still work to do to, you know, maintain and improve yet further patient experience, and that's why, of course, we've got the focus on these mitigations. So I've drifted a bit from the purpose of the paper there, but happy to take any questions on it, unless colleagues from the team, Rachel or Lee, want to add anything to that beforehand.
The context for me is really important, and I think, you know, you're right that we must not be complacent, because we wouldn't want to normalise 20,000 hours. You know, we know there was a time where we thought that was, you know, very abnormal, and then it's gone to 32,000, and we know that's abnormal. And the you know, the impact that you said from a board perspective, of course, we know that the chairs of our Finance and Performance Committee, Quality Committee, People and Culture Committee are really close to all of this as well. So you know, they are delving into the detail of the impact organisationally and on patients. So I saw Kerry, I saw Bethan, and I saw Martin and Damon. So I think Bethan was first. Did you want to add anything? Sorry.
Yeah, well, I was just going to just add in 2 things. One, which is there's a paragraph in the paper which I suppose is designed to give further assurance in terms of the range of actions that we initially wrote up are not static. You know, we're completing actions. Some actions don't work. We're trying to work through new things. So you can see there's an example in there about working with commissioners and third sector around the welfare and sitting service. So there's constantly work and thought going into, you know, what's the next step, what's the next thing that we can do. And the other thing I just wanted to mention, which isn't in the paper particularly, but we did talk about it briefly in F&P, was the kind of ongoing pressure, I suppose, on health boards to deal with those hospital hand-over delays and the pressures in the system. And in fact, that was the subject of a discussion at ESC last week, I think it was now, where we had a session for about an hour where we went through, and the commissioner, Chief Ambulance Service Commissioner, really pressed health boards to look at the data, look at the harm, and to take action themselves in terms of improvements within their system. So just thought I'd want to bring out those couple of other things.
Yeah, and this week's charts look very promising until you look at the numbers on the axis. But,
Yeah,
you know,
exactly,
anyway.
yeah.
So Bethan.
Thank you, Chair. Really pleased to hear your comments there, Jason, about the improving trend since the new year. That's really welcome for all of us, I'm sure. We had quite a discussion on this at F&P last week, didn't we, Jarga? Yeah. And, you know, when you look at the report as it stands, without knowing that there's been this improving trend in January, you know, it's eye-watering, isn't it? Because for many months we've been talking about 30% of our resources being lost to handover delays, and now we've gone to 37%. And it begs the question, where is this going to go? Where will this end? So it's really great to hear that there is an improving trend in the hours lost to handover delays since January. I guess the other thing that jumps out to me here is the number of requests made and the number approved or declined for immediate release requests. And clearly some of those stats are worrying here, you know, with the amber one, which we know can very quickly lead to significant harm for an individual. You know, 156 were released and 541 were not. That's quite you know, it's the wrong way of the line for us. Have we seen an improving trend in the immediate release requests as well since the new year?
So yes, in January we've seen both a reduction in the number of requests needing to be made, and compliance remains not where we need it to be on red. Sadly, we still don't see every, but with a reduced number, the situation's much improved.
Good. I mean, let's hope that will continue. I mean, there's lots of changes in January, as you've said, industrial action, the hospitals have taken different action. I'm sure we'll talk about that later. So it's hard really to know if this is going to be sustained, isn't it? Would you agree with that, Jason?
I think that's right. But I mean, I wouldn't go as far as to say we've got green shoots, because we're still a long way off where we need to be. But what we are seeing, is good improvement. And I think the thing, that is most pleasing to see is that reduction from 5 hours on the amber median down to less than an hour. We know there is substantial avoidable harm in that. And when we think about some of the really difficult cases we were seeing in November and December, they were largely in the amber category, not in the red, largely in the amber category. So the fact that we've got, we are seeing as a result of the improvement in handover delays, because our production is the same. Our production has stayed largely static, in the high 90s. The new rosters are all in, as we said they would be. We've recruited all the people we said we would recruit. We've got more people actually coming in. We had 75 come out a week or so ago, and there's a few more to come out in the next couple of weeks. So we've recruited all the people we said. So whilst our production has stayed largely static, because of the reduction in handover lost hours and the reduction in activity, that's what's driving that 4-hour gain, which is significant for patients.
And sorry, if I may just finish very quickly, Chair, your comment about not becoming complacent is so important, and I know we continue to say this in Quest and the importance of that, because the report again suggests to us we're estimating 2,195 people would be subject to significant harm then because of handover delays between November and March. That's concerning, isn't it? So I think you're right to say let's not be complacent.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm going to go this way and then I'll come back. Okay, so Damon.
Thanks. The comment is probably what I should have said earlier on, to be honest, but in just relation to the performance and the fact that we are seeing this reduction in demand, which is a bit unique, and there's only one thing that we can really think that's causing that. I guess the comments for any members of the public to say that, despite us going through industrial action, which is difficult, we are providing the service, we are providing derogations, and I implore the members of the public, if they need the service, please do use us, because we are there and we are providing lifeline cover. Because clearly that demand dropping off is a little bit concerning regarding potentially people who should be calling us who are not. So that's just the message I'd like to put away.
And the potential for a bow wave.
I mean, just to add to that, Kevin, if I can, I mean, as you'd expect, I mean, we've been doing some analysis of what's underneath the drop. It is very difficult to pin down what's causing the drop, but what we can see is where the drop is occurring. So we've seen substantial reductions in cases coded as breathing problems. Now, that's associated clearly with strep A, COVID and flu and cold weather. There are environmental factors, if you like, which have led to that reduction. We've seen a reduction in sick person and falls, cold weather again, and the environment, and we've seen a reduction in chest pain, I think was the other one. So there are noticeable shifts, if you like, but the things that you would expect people to continue to call us for, strokes, for example, there's no marked difference. So I do think, there is some sensible use of the emergency service by communities across Wales. They're still calling us when they need us for the sickest stuff, but probably the environmental factors around us have shifted in our favour and led to some of those reductions we're seeing.
Okay, great, thanks. Brendan, was your point on something specific, or?
It was on the points that were raised about the...
By Bethan?
Yes.
Okay, so we go to Brendan, come to Kerry, and then Martin.
Okay, yes, thanks. So it's just to say that last Thursday, Andy and I went to the Senedd for the launch of the Royal College of Emergency Medicine census, which was chaired by the UK College President Adrian Boyle, and the Minister gave the keynote address. And there were a couple of fairly harrowing presentations from ED consultants about the conditions that they've had to work in over the last few months. patients in offices with intravenous drips in chairs because they'd given up on trying to get them a bed. They couldn't even get them a trolley. Patients waiting days in the department. And I think when we talk about getting immediate release, just hearing about some of the pressures within the department with no flow going through the system, just reflects how difficult it has been for everybody working across urgent and emergency care. But clearly we continue to work with our colleagues there. The other point is that anecdotally talking to doctors around the system, while our demand has dropped off, there have been some instances where people have turned up to ED by car, taken by relatives who were seriously sick. And that has caused problems. Obviously, patients are brought in by ambulances, they're pre-alerted, they know what type of condition, hopefully the patient has been stabilized. When they stagger out from a car, they really don't know the condition of the patient, and so they've had to change some of their priorities in their initial triage. So it has been quite difficult from that perspective.
Okay, thanks. Kerry.
My points have been covered, Chair. Thanks.
Martin?
A couple of points and a couple of questions, if I may, Chairman. I mean, first of all, I think it is important to acknowledge that there's been an improvement, and that's important, obviously, but it doesn't encourage me to suspect or believe that we have a sustainable solution, right? I think it's temporary, it's accidental almost. So it can happen again, because I don't feel, and I'm not saying it's an ambulance issue, I think this is a trust hospital issue by and large, and we're at the other end of it, if you like. So that's worth bearing in mind. But I noticed which brings me on to the questions. One is about immediate release. And I noticed there's a comment right at the end of, it's on paragraph 6, the first point. The trust's actions are completed, but compliance remains problematic. Now, I read that a couple of times, and I suspect this means that in reality, this is the trust, the other trusts are not complying with the approach that's been agreed. Now, if that's the case, we need to do something about that, or let me ask, is something being done about it? And the other question is, I remember last time we spoke about this, we talked about Cardiff backing the trend. And I'd like to know what's been learned from the Cardiff experience that hasn't been implemented elsewhere, because they seem to be the good boys, if you like, and everybody should learn from it. There's two questions. Yeah. One is about the compliance being problematical, and the other one about Cardiff.
So I'm smirking a bit, Martin, because that's I was going to go to Cardiff in response to your first point. So, okay. I mean, I agree. I think and that's why I'm hesitant to say we've got green shoots of recovery, because I think the reduction we are seeing is largely as a result of a reduction in activity. Yeah. Now that's not true in Cardiff, because we have seen prior to the reduction in Cardiff, marked reduction in losses at the emergency department in Cardiff because of the actions that they've been taking. So, the system agreed what's been described as a 4-hour backstop, which essentially said that no vehicle would wait more than 4 hours. Now, 4 hours is too long, but it's better than where we have been of late, quite a significant improvement from where we've been of late. And Cardiff have been applying that backstop. They've been really clear, both, when I spoke to the chief executive, the chief operating officer, the director of nursing down there, and others, that they are very clear as a leadership team that risk needs to be spread throughout the entire pathway of emergency care and not held either in the community or solely in the ED. So they've been taking actions locally at UHW to pull patients through the emergency department where it's appropriate to do that. And of course, what we've seen is a reduction in our losses at the ED. Now, the discussion that Rachel mentioned at ESC last week, led by the Chief Ambulance Service Commissioner, was very much, imploring the other, well, not going to say 6, but it's 5 health boards with emergency departments in Wales to adopt the best practice, both from Cardiff and from other places that we've offered to the system here, particularly from England. So Walsall NHS
Yeah,
Trust
so-
is a good example where we've where we've seen good work locally and maintenance of very low handover losses, and we've imported, if you like, that best practice and shared that with colleagues in the system here to say these are examples where this can be delivered, Cardiff being one locally and one from a different system. Stephen was pushing very much with health board colleagues in that meeting in East last week to adopt what has been seen to work, has proven to work. So we have to wait and see what now happens. That meeting was last week. The message was very clear last week, as was the minister's message in the summit that she held with chairs and chief executives on handover delays. But I think we've exhausted, Martin, pretty much all that we can in seeking to influence improvements there, but we are seeing it in some places. On compliance with immediate release directions, we've recently refreshed the All Wales policy, which was endorsed actually at the East meeting last week by chief executives. Some changes and learning, minor changes and learning from the experience of recent months. And we also produce a weekly compliance report, which I shared directly with chief executives, showing their compliance against both red and amber for requests for each of their emergency departments. And again, that's a discussion in the Emergency Ambulance Services Committee meetings, where both compliance data and the impact of that is shared with chief executives. So again, we're doing, I think, our bit, both in terms of supporting the system with a new policy, but also sharing compliance data and raising or escalating concern to the appropriate committees and individual office holders.
Okay, thanks very much. Thank you, Chairman.
And I think it's critical that we do keep that that pressure on. We can't afford not to in the system we're operating in. Okay, thank you, everybody. We're asked to note the report and the progress that we're making on the actions, which I think we've done, and consider whether there are any further actions available to the trust. I think where we are is keeping up the pressure that we are able to within a system that is very challenged. I'm not sure that we can consider anything beyond that at this point. Okay, I think I've got agreement. So thank you for that. We'll move on to item 9, and that's around industrial action. Lee, have I missed something?
No, you've not missed anything at all, Chair. So to start with, I'm going to hand to Angie, who's going to commence with our presentation for all today.
Thank you. Can you move to the? I can't move. Oh, thank you. Thank you. So yes, Lee and I are going to share this presentation with you, and it was to give the board that sort of broader context of what we're dealing with in terms of industrial action, but also then Lee will go into more details about our structures, our planning and our response. And we're going to conclude by talking about the risks. So I start with this slide, which was to give you an indication of the numbers of colleagues in the organisation who are in unions. So we have at the top that you can't actually see, but it says RCN, which is the smallest number of union members, quite a small number there. GMB, Unite and Unison. And the reason I put this on here is because I think it's important in WAS to understand that we have these 4 different unions, that we are a heavily unionised organisation, and that we have a significant challenge around managing those different parts of the organisation. I would also just give for context that we are aware through insight and intelligence, but also because of our good relationships with our trade unions, that certain parts of the country may have a stronger representation of particular unions as well. So that does help to sort of shape the dynamic, etc. And I've just put on here, just for information, that Unison are reballoting at the moment. Their ballot ends on the 16th of February. And if they are successful and get the mandate, their industrial action could go on until August. So we have a 6-month period where each of the trade unions can take on the industrial action strike days. So we have up until August that this could be continuing, without the fact that they could obviously reballot again after that. The next slide. Again, what I wanted to share with you here is just that time frame, because I think some of us it's hard to sort of remember, but this is only since December. But obviously, as Jason mentioned, since December, we've already had 6 days of industrial action, 2 for RCN, 4 for GMB and Unite. And coming up now, from now until the end of March, based on what we know today, and I'd say that very clearly, we have another 5 dates. But remember, of course, Unison will close. We could potentially have another date, or GMB and Unite could decide that they want to add in some extra dates. And I think that starts to give a feeling of the complexity, the regularity and frequency of what we're dealing with, but also it shows you the different times. And that was really important, that I felt that I wanted to share, that on particular dates, and if we take the 6th of February as the sort of key one now, we have different dates for each of the unions. So managing that from the point of view of the organisation becomes more significant and more challenging. And I think we have to be really open and honest with colleagues here, but also members of the public, that this is becoming far more challenging and far more disruptive. A couple more points before I hand over to Lee. I think really important to sort of note is that behind all this, obviously, there is the operational impact, the clinical impact, but also every part of the organisation has been impacted by this. So there will be all the administration that has to go on around this in terms of making sure people get paid correctly. There will be staff in our corporate areas who will have been redeployed to support operational colleagues, and communicating. We have done, I think, probably about 8 or 9 WAST Lives, which are our open Q&A sessions with colleagues. We have probably now, I think it's about 60 FAQs in relation to industrial action, and these continue because our colleagues want to know things, they're concerned, they want answers to questions, and so that need to communicate becomes even more critical. And I think, Jason mentioned the tone that we've taken, and I just want to sort of follow up on that. Led by Jason, our approach has been senior leadership visibility, to keep communicating, to keep listening, and to keep learning. And, we're going to maintain that approach as we go forward. But that takes time, and that takes investment, and it takes a real sense of partnership. So I'll pause there and I'll hand over to Lee, and then we'll come back to risks at the end. Thanks, Lee.
Thank you, Angie. If we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So foreseeing a challenging winter, the organisation signed off a strategy for winter seasonal approach. Of course, we saw the culmination of winter, the industrial unrest picking up, and of course at the time there was potential for possible power impacts. And so these were grouped together into a single strategy that was signed off in the organisation on the 9th of November. And underneath that then was a response. And what this sets out is the response that has been put into place, which beneath the executive team is the senior business continuity planning team. Now, the structure will look familiar to some of you because it's mirrored on the practice that was brought through from the pandemic and has a very similar element to it. However, it was given much more of a focus on the issues of the day. And within the operational line there, if you're able to see, what you can see is that there are specific teams that were established for the management of industrial action and also in terms of gathering intelligence across health and social care as well. A couple of the teams there, whilst at the time this was pulled and at the start of the structures they were dormant, one cell, the infection prevention control cell, has been activated during the period for advice as well. So there's a very solid management arrangement behind what's been occurring. Thank you. So there's been quite a lot of planning. Thank you. If you could knock on, please. Thank you. A substantial amount of planning has taken place on the lead up to days of industrial actions. We have had plentiful, I would say, dialogue with our trade union colleagues. That's both unions engaged in industrial action and those not engaged. So we've been speaking with all our trade unions. Clearly, as we approach particular days for particular trade union action, we have been in dialogue in relation to the derogations and exemptions, and that has been brought through into our industrial action planning team. There has been a significant amount of communications work, so thanks to Estelle and her team. Touched on, Angie's talked about the number of internal WAS live sessions that have been conducted. There's been written material internally, as well as the extensive work with our external partners, and of course public messaging for each of the industrial action days. We have, and I have, particularly with my colleagues in health boards, talked quite a lot about the impact of handover delays and emphasised that with the impact on production, the number of resources that we're likely to have to operate normally during industrial action, the importance of, I mean, I've used the request has been the eradication of handover delays, and you'll see in a moment what's been happening in relation to handover delays. Whilst eradication hasn't occurred, what I have to say is that health boards have taken steps. Clearly, they've taken steps because on industrial action days, there's been significant reduction in the lost time for handovers, which has aided safe services to the activity that we have seen. So on the day, each day of action is supported by an operations order, and with that is a dedicated command arrangement. That has flexed as we've learned through each of the industrial action days, but it's also slimmed as we've moved through different sets of derogations. And as the derogations have narrowed, because there has been difference in derogations between the initial GMB days and the later Unite days, that has required us to slim command arrangements in order to try and get more resource to frontline service. We have on each occasion raised our REAP level to REAP level 4, and the clinical safety plan is available to be called upon for each of the days of action. However, we have been fortunate in that so far our use of the clinical safety plan has been at lower levels during the days, particularly during the days in January, but that's aided by some of the other elements that we've already talked about this morning. Just to touch very briefly on NEPS, so non-emergency patient transport services, we have secured derogations from each of the unions in terms of NEPS activity, which includes renal, oncology, and humanitarian journeys, which has been essential, clearly, for safety. What we have decided is that actually the activity for NEPS will be restricted to that only. And so it has led to the cancellation of journeys associated with outpatient appointments, etc. And patients have had to reorganise those with health boards. Now, health boards have been aware of that and been asked to accommodate changes to appointments. But so there will have been some disruption for some of those planned appointments, but we have dedicated the resource that therefore has been available to ensure that that derogated work is undertaken. To touch also on the 111 service, a range of tactics have been developed by the team for 111 in order to improve or sustain experience and safety for those in contact with 111. The other element too, I just want to touch on, which is relates to this balance that we have sought to achieve, and that's ultimately around respecting decisions of our staff, so staff amongst each other, we have worked to inform staff of where they may be able to work from and move some assets around that could be seen as enabling them to come to work if that has been the decision that they wish to make. So the next one is the data, and it's, to be fair, I'm probably not going to be able to talk to this one without the slide. So we're just having...
Just while we're waiting then, Lee, I'm just conscious there are coats and scarves going on around the room, and I'm just wondering if it's just a bit too chilly for most of us. If someone could perhaps warm us up a little bit, notwithstanding the chief executive's hardness.
I'll open the window, Kevin, in a second. Yeah.
Well, we just warm people up for a little bit, and then we'll go back. And again, just while we're waiting, then Lee, 6th of February, and you may have a comment here. The 6th of February looks like it's going to be really challenging, and I'm just thinking we need to learn everything we possibly can in terms of, you know, all the sorts of things you've just spoken about, and how derogations might work, and how they're, you know, sort of discussed, agreed, because that's going to be a really difficult day on the face of it.
Yes, I mean, I'm happy to give some context in terms of what we've been experiencing and how that's happening. So we've been, in terms of the impact that we've been seeing, and hopefully we'll get to see some of the UHP positions, but we're seeing around 20 to 30% of our resources missing due to taking full strike. Anything from 5 to 10% doing derogated work, with the remainder have been working as normal. Now, we've seen probably slightly more striking through the GMB versus the Unite, but it's 20 to 30%. What I believe we've experienced is a greater swaying to full strike as opposed to derogations. However, our conversations in derogations are hugely important. And as you say, for the 6th and 7th of February, across those days, we've got RCN action, Unite action, and GMB action. So it'll be the first time for us that we've got multiple unions taking action on the same days. And so the matter of derogations becomes even more important, because if we have the pattern that we have seen before, which is a greater sway to full strike, then there is a potential that what we're talking about is half resourcing. And half resourcing is certainly more going to carry greater risk, which is going to require greater consideration in terms of mitigations. Now, we had sought through WAS Live to explain derogations and to talk to our staff about what a derogation means, and of course why in health, when there is a need to sustain life and limb, why derogations are vitally important, and actually sought to talk around how performing derogations is arguably enabling of others to take action. Because ultimately, I don't believe any of us sitting around this table, whether it's trade union side or whether it's management side, want harm to occur as a consequence of action. And so it's clear that with a combined union action on the same day, the risk is greater. In terms of derogation discussions, we have a dedicated team amongst the assistant directors who are supported by colleagues from workforce who are engaging with our trade union partners in those discussions. Of course, from our perspective, they are discussions, because the approval of derogations is not a matter for us, it is a matter for the trade unions. And so we do talk to the trade unions in terms of clarity on that and understanding ultimately that's going to be a matter for trade unions to decide. Further to that, how the trade unions communicate the necessity or essentialness of performing derogations is equally a matter for trade unions. But we've certainly spoken to staff about why trade unions are enabling and important in terms of safety. But to date, we've seen more striking than performing derogations. So it is something we're cognizant of. For action on the 6th, so we have deployed different mitigations as we've moved through the days. So our last day of mitigation on the 3rd, we deployed military onto the front line for the first time, working with clinical managers and managers who are clinicians, creating in the region of another 20 resources. So that certainly aided, and it's highly likely that that's going to repeat now as we move through joint industrial action days. So definitely tuned into that, Chair, but yeah, and taking the mitigations that
No, that's
we
really
were able.
Kevin, sorry, if I could just read, just against that backdrop of the 6, it's really important to remember, of course, RCN going out in the health boards really impacts on the mitigation they do to support us on our strike days. And we're already hearing through our industrial action workforce cell, you know, that impact will be far greater. Just wanted to reiterate.
Okay, great.
Okay, so what?
Sorry, Bethan, you had your
Can I
hand
just
up.
make a quick comment, please,
Yes.
Chair, if that's okay? It links with the comments from both of you around the WAST Live, and I just wanted to thank and commend the execs for the way they have held these WAST Live meetings the day before, because I joined into one of the WAST Live meetings, and what I had from that was, you know, execs and their teams have clearly had the visibility. There was very open communication and people were in listening mode and a supportive mode. There was real clarity in what was being said and a calmness, which I think really struck me and was so important, because those things are more important than ever when we're facing difficulties like this. So I just wanted to make that comment and acknowledge that, really, having sat in on one.
And my sense is that there's a very different culture and context in health than in perhaps other industries, if you like. Board Secretary is keeping me straight here and is suggesting that we take a 5-minute break right now so that our colleagues can, under no pressure, get us back on to Lee's slide that we will need to have a look at. Are we good with that? Yep. Let's have 5 minutes break now then, and hopefully we can get the slide up so we can talk to it. Reconvene. Can we go back onto live streaming? Great. Folks, there was a glitch in the room. Apparently the slide deck did show online. There's a glitch in the room, but everybody should have received an email now with this presentation and the next one. So the Industrial Action Trust Board 26th of January 23 paper. And we're looking, Lee, for the, is it the EMS data comparison slide?
Yes, Chair, slide 6.
There we go. Over to you.
Thank you. So I'm really conscious now we lost a bit of time with that, so I'll try and keep this really quick. So we've got here some comparisons of the Industrial Action Day compared to the average of non-industrial action days across the month. The first slide shows December. So the first chart here with the purple data is the 999 call activity. Now, just to talk about this one very briefly, because you may have picked it up in the Chief Exec's report in relation to the Intelligent Routing Platform, IRP. So it's difficult to do a 999 comparison from month to month and even from day here, because up until the 19th of December, we were part of the Intelligent Routing Platform for 999. However, as that was creating a fifth of our activity until that point, and we were answering about 38% of all rerouted demand across England and Wales, that was temporarily, our involvement in the IRP was temporarily suspended. And so there was a change in terms of what was generating some of the activity in December. But what you can see is that the action day on the 21st was lower in terms of 999 activity. The first dark blue shows the UHP for conveying resources. So you can see that the average across December was 88% on the industrial action day at 71%. The incidents that we responded to was down on industrial action days. This is the light blue chart, 480 versus an average of 624. So we went to less activity on those days. Now, what you then see across the bottom, so first on the left is the red performance. So of the activity that we did respond to, it was improved on the industrial action day for red at 43% versus 39%. And the amber 1 median was also shorter on the industrial action day at 2 hours 11 versus 3 hours and 30. The biggest impact, of course, as you can see there on the bottom right, is the handover position. So you can see the comparison there practically halved, 1,050 versus 490. So the UHP loss was certainly significantly aided by the reduction in the lost hours. Slide 7 is exactly the same principle, but we've brought through here data for January, recognising, of course, January requires verification at the end of the month, so some caution on this data until that process occurs. But thought it was important to bring this through. The last day of action is not in this data because it's been too soon. We weren't able to include it. So the 11th of January was a GMB day, and the 19th of January was the first Unite day. So you can see a slight difference here in terms of the 999 activity. So down compared to the average on the first day, but the second day on the 19th of January, much closer to the rest of the month. Now we saw something very similar as well this week, on the 23rd. So very similar to the rest of the month. The UHP then, we've had a good UHP across January for conveying resources at 94%, but on the industrial action days, the 11th at 62% and the 19th at 73%, slightly higher for the most recent day, because that was mitigated further by the additional military capacity working with some of our management. Attending incidents, again, you can see how it was reduced on the 11th, but closer to the average on the 19th. Performance is also same for red. We are seeing a better response to red patients on the industrial action days. However, the month has been a month of 2 halves because the back end of this month has been greater easing, and so the performance has been improved. So that's just something also to keep in mind in terms of the average non-industrial action days. Amber has been much closer. But again, you can see on the right-hand side that still the overall average for the month at 528, compare that to the previous month, so you can see the improvement, the easing of pressure, but still going even further on industrial action days. Lastly, slide 8 then is a slide here with the 111 position. Due to time, I'll perhaps not labour here. Colleagues can certainly take a look at the data here, but again, you can see that it's been aided from a demand perspective as well in terms of public use of services. So lastly, just to cover off some of the risks and matters, and that we know that our planning team and the structures that I outlined earlier on are all very cognizant of, and things for us to keep in mind. There is an incredible amount of planning that's taking place behind the scenes, and for some of our teams, this is all they are doing. And so particularly across operations, this is the day job. And then of course, getting closer to and on days of action, the clinical team is moved to the front line. WAD team are very much engaged in play. It's the organisation, incredibly disruptive. So we is having an impact on other activity that we're able to do within the organisation. We naturally have a risk around our ability to respond to patients. I think we touched on that just before the break, Chair, particularly around the 6th and 7th. And I just want to emphasise Angie's point. One of the biggest enablers for us in sustaining the services we've been able to has been the hospital position. And with the RCN taking action on the 6th and 7th, there is a risk that will impede the health board's ability to deliver what they have delivered before. So we do have to keep that in mind. I'm going to finish there. I think Angie's going to cover off a couple of the last people impact risks.
Yeah, and we'll make this fast. You can obviously see the ones that we've shared with you. Just want to pick out a couple. No, it's absolutely blatantly obvious, but the financial impact on staff in a cost of living crisis, we know our staff are not doing this lightly. We become, we as good employers remain concerned about the impact that will have on them, particularly if this becomes very regular and the number of days that they take industrial action becomes more increased. And the interpersonal relationships, I think the point that Jason made and I've made about the tone and approach, that is a key risk that we're trying to mitigate as much as possible to make sure that we are all working effectively. But obviously, the longer it goes on, there are risks in terms of, potential concerns from different parts of the organisation. So we remain really focused on that. And I just wanted to flag the reputational impact. Obviously, we recognise for our patients and the public, there may be concerns in terms of the reputation, but actually in terms of attracting people to join us, our recruitment campaigns, but also retention. We saw turnover our highest ever in December. Some of the initial feedback we had from exit interviews was about the lived experience that colleagues are having. So, these are all accumulating into a risk, and we've got the risk register coming up, and obviously this is a new risk that's been identified for this quarter. Stop there. Thank you.
Okay, I think the really useful report of fact. So unless anybody's got any burning points on Lee's part of that report, Jogger.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, it was really useful and reassuring that so much kind of analysis has been done on the impact of this and the communications that we're having with the trade unions. I just want a quick question on the derogation. I know you touched on it's down to each union and the impact of the 6th or 7th, and it'd be good if we can get some sort of consistency between the unions, but that's a point for discussion. But with the RCN action coming up, do we know with the health boards what their kind of initial take will be on the impact that will have, which can roll onto us? Are we having any kind of dialogue with them to see whether there is some kind of intelligence we can share about the potential impact, just to help plan in advance?
So, because I can answer that from a WAST perspective, and I would anticipate potentially something similar with the health board and from the experience from the last RCN action days. And it can be somewhat unfortunate that discussions on derogations often go to the wire. And the situation is similar for us, in fact, in terms of our derogations with our trade unions will not really take place in earnest until next week. Now, we've made ourselves available to have that dialogue with unions in relation to derogations this week. And of course, we are cognizant that the sooner that unions confirm to us what those derogations look like, the greater window that affords us in order to prepare. But the reality from the last RCN days is that those discussions really went to the wire, and there's very much an attempt to share as soon as we can. And I certainly know I share our derogations as soon as we can. But even from ours, they have been, right up to perhaps even the day before action, before we've been in a position to do that. So that's the, it's a 14-day window to start with. And then from there, it is really a case of trying to get to the table. But the experience for us, I think, will be we'll push towards the wire for next week.
Okay, we'll just bring Liam in, who might have a broader view on.
Yes, so just to compliment you, the negotiations across the health boards on the derogations are mostly held centrally from a health board perspective. So there's a lot of conversation that goes on directly between the Royal College of Nursing, the Chief Nurse's Office, and there is a nominated EDN from one of the health boards that's part of that conversation. There is a Exec Directors Nursing meeting tomorrow, and that's in two parts. So first part will be really getting a sense of where our initial conversations have got to. And certainly the initial conversation that we've had with the RCN in WAST is that we're expecting them to be taking additional action and steps over that which they took in their last industrial action, and they are looking to be, from their perspective, more impactful. I anticipate that is what my colleagues will be sharing with me tomorrow. There is then a session tomorrow afternoon with the Chief Nurse for Wales, and we'll be working through what our intelligence is telling us and how we think that will impact on planning for the 2 days.
2 seconds, Damon. Someone, it's all right, Ange.
Yeah,
Yep.
it was just to reassure as well, there is an industrial action workforce cell that meets every 2 to 3 days, which has all the sort of key leads across every trust and health board. And that link up until recently, it's obviously they've been listening to what we're doing, but obviously now it's that two-way dialogue. But I do think, we are being given very clear messages around some of that mitigation that they've been able to help us with will not be available. And I think Lee's point about that, the individual nuances of each health board is slightly problematic as well. So we are anticipating a far more challenging day, but it will go to the wire in terms of understanding exactly what that means, I think.
Okay, thanks. Damon?
Yeah, just as a comment, really, my own union is going through the reballot, and I know that, it's going to be, what I was trying to get at is I think probably the first time, we're all fairly new to this in respect of, fortunately there has been industrial action for many, many years, and hopefully there won't be again. But I think, we're all cognizant of the fact that colleagues here, we're all learning this. So the first time around is particularly problematic, trying to understand what it is that we're trying to do and also understand what the trust position is. And the trust is also in the same position. Probably going forward, it shouldn't be as cumbersome. We've got to strike that balance of, representing the membership. We have certain members that are, quite hard line on what they want to do. And we're trying to get that balance across the board. So some of that is learning on each industrial action day, what works well, what doesn't, what satisfies the members, what the trust needs, and hopefully getting to a place where we've got a safe service. But, I hate to say it, but clearly some sort of disruption, because that's what the nature of it is. So I don't know if that helps. Hopefully it'll be a little bit smoother going forward.
I think that does help, actually. I'm going to move us on now. Just one final point, Ange. Your point around the lived experience and the reasons why people are choosing other options for employment against the lived experience is really well made. And I think that's something we need to keep very close to, don't we? Okay, if there's nothing burning, we'll move on. Okay, thanks very much. Trish, this is Risk Management and Corporate Risk Register. Give paper read as given. I mean, we're very familiar with 223 and 224, very familiar, and the others that are on the paper. But there's a closure and some other potential things that you want to bring to our attention.
Thanks, Chair. I won't take the full 15 minutes, I don't think, because we have had a good discussion on those. So just to reiterate that these principal risks are reviewed in some detail at the committees, and you'll see from the AAA reports, not only that the risks are pulled out specifically, but you'll see from their agenda that actually those highest rated risks run through the agenda and drive that agenda. The board wanted us to draw out specifically in this exec summary where that regular review and discussion of risk and mitigations and actions is taking place. And so you'll see that in some detail in paragraphs 10 to 12. We've already talked about 223 and 224. We didn't have a Quest meeting in this cycle. And Quest is the one that actually these two go to. But
I think it's important to point out, which is in the AAA reports, that the People and Culture Committee and the Finance and Performance Committee also review these two risks. And certainly in the Finance and Performance Committee meeting that we had last week, we went into some detailed discussion around that as well. The other two, so those two are 25s. The other two high-rated risks are 160, which is sickness, absence, and 201, which is the reputational risks. Both remain at 20, and again, those committee AAA alert advisor Shaw reports really demonstrate the focus on those in those meetings. The next People and Culture Committee as well will get the managing attendance internal audit, which will be that third line of defence, which is obviously a very strong one for the committee to get assurance on. There are a couple of actions that are off track, which is understandable with the current pressures, but they're being picked up in these reviews that are taking place in this next round this month and ongoing. So there's a closure of one risk, risk 245, which is the estate's accommodation risk, which has reached tolerance with the actions that have been put in place. And there are a couple of risks that are being worked on, the detail of which is in the paper, was discussed at Finance and Performance Committee as well, and they'll come through in the next round with a bit more detail on the controls and the assurances and the actions. And I think lastly, because we've got the audit well-structured assessment on the agenda for this meeting, I think it's important to point out that the report recognised that we are strengthening systems of assurance with regular review, but I think that there's further work that we can do to make sure that we are looking at those mitigating actions and that they are having the intended impact. And I think that there's a couple of things that we can do to address that. I think firstly, in the next round of certainly Quest and PCC in the next couple of meetings, I think we could probably have a bit more of a focus on those gaps and the actions as well in the BAF, because we've matured that BAF to a much larger document with a lot more detail. So I think some focus that, you know, the gaps and the actions match and they are making an impact. And secondly, we'll have some board development scheduled really to go through those constituent parts of that BAF as well, and to support the board in the challenge and support around the BAF as well. That's all I was going to pull out. I wasn't going to go through the individual risks. As I say, the committees have dealt with them in some real detail.
Was there something about the risk management transformation program?
Yes, so the risk management transformation program is reported as part of the IMTP. There is one element that's off track, which is the All Wales Datex, which is somewhat out of our control at this point. But that's reported through the IMTP, and the audit committee also gets updates on that as well.
Okay. Great. So we're asked to note the closure of 245, which seems to me pretty straightforward. Good. Looking around. Review the framework and to note the update on the risk management transformation program. Content? Great. Sorry.
Just make one point on the framework. I think we discussed this at a previous board meeting, not the last one, a few meetings ago, was the issue of where scores of 25 are recorded. Should we be getting, as a board, a formal report as a consequence of that scoring, rather than deferring them to committees within the organisation? Now, I'm not saying I've got a view about this particularly, other than to bring it to the attention of this board, that it is something we need to decide as a framework issue. You know, in other words, we've got, I've forgotten how many are actually on the list, but there's 17. Only 2 at 25 and 2 or 3 at 20. And they tend not to come here other than as inclusions in other reports. Now, whether they deserve a separate discussion because they're 25s at this level is something we ought to have a view about, in my view. You see what I mean? We've discussed it in audit committee, Trish, a few times, and we haven't recommended a view other than to say it should be discussed at full board, and a view taken about how to handle those higher, very high marked risks.
Yeah, Go ahead.
So I think there is an opportunity with this risk report for the board to discuss those high-rated risks. There is certainly the heavy lifting, if you like, done by the committees where they have that opportunity to really go into the detail. And that was my point of spending some more time on where the gaps are and the assurances and the actions. So I think there is an opportunity for the board to review that, but also the exec summary, the purpose of really labouring those 4 high-rated risks as to where they sit both in this agenda, but also in the agendas of the committee, so that there is some assurance that it's not just being looked at the committees, because those 2 high-rated risks we've just spent really a good deal of time on, not necessarily, and if you look at the detail of the BAF of 223 and 224, you will see all of those actions incorporated in them. So it may be something in how we talk about that particular framework, Martin, and how we actually interpret that at this meeting, rather than having a discussion on that particular BAF risk, the way it's actually driven right through the agenda, and draw that out in a bit more particularity. And perhaps when that comes through to audit committee, we can really have a think about whether you're comfortable from an audit committee chair's perspective that we're doing that appropriately.
My only comment is this, that is about, I still think it's an executive responsibility to recommend and assure us as a board that everything's being done on these issues. And I worry that some of that action is being taken at committee level. So I do worry that the issue between an executive responsibility, or the chief executive responsibility, therefore, I guess, and the committee responsibilities can get blurred. And I would rather see, the actions and the issues being solely in an executive lap, and the committees are there to look at the governance frameworks around them and be assured that actions are being taken. Now, when it comes to scores of 25, I believe that there is an argument that those issues are brought to this board directly rather than through committees. That's just a view. I'm not saying it's the right one or wrong one, there's just different ways of doing this. And it's just that this board needs to be, if they don't want to do that, this board, then I'm happy. I'll support whatever this board would want to do on that from an audit perspective. That'd be my view. I just have a little bit of concern that the committees are doing a little bit too much, and this board, this particular board, is not doing enough on these bigger issues.
I'll go to Jason and then I'll come back because I've got a point I'd like to make as well.
I mean, I think I want to take it away and reflect on it and think about the point you're making, Martin. And I think I can see the argument that you make about risks at 25 and ensuring that the full board is across the mitigations that are in place, or the actions in hand to try to manage those risks. I suppose my initial reaction is we need to reflect on and think about what impact that would have if we were to do that and bring a report here, what duplication or what impact that would have on the committee structure and how that operates. So I suppose my ask, Kevin, as chair today, would be assign an action to me. Let me take that away with the executive team, ponder that before we meet on the next occasion, and consider what that might mean, and then we'll bring a paper back through setting out those deliberations and what our recommendation would be.
I have been around longer than perhaps most people in the room, and I do recall, Martin, you brought this up on a number of occasions, and my understanding was that we were comfortable with the route through and the management of risk and its reporting. That was my understanding. That said, I think Jason's offer is welcome, and then we can clarify exactly what we as a board need, want, and will be assured by. Does that help? Are you happy with that, Martin?
Yeah, perfectly happy.
Okay.
Good way forward.
Sorry, Liam.
Yeah,
and then we'll move on.
It is a supplementary, but I think given we're in a public board, I just want to add a level of assurance to others who may be watching. So I absolutely hear the point of principle, that is about a risk that is scored at 25 and the consideration that we would need to give as an executive. But for the two risks that we are carrying at 25 currently, I feel quite strongly that across the whole organisation, the scrutiny of the risk, the mitigating actions and anything else that we could possibly do is constant. And I think when we reflect on the amount of conversation we have at full public board and in private board, those two risks drive a significant amount of our discussion and our decision making. So the principle I absolutely understand, but I think it's important from my perspective to say I feel very confident that the challenge of the executive in quality and safety, in how we're managing our relationships with our partners on handover delays, is constant and appropriate.
Yeah, and I guess that plays back to my point. And Bethan, we're going to run it way over here, but you've opened a can of worms now, Martin. Thanks very much.
Sorry, Chairman.
Right, Bethan and Kerry, a very last word.
Thank you. I hear what you're saying, Martin. I do agree with Liam. In Quest, I feel we do that. The agenda is mostly nearly all relating to those two risks, if I'm honest, whichever report we're looking at. And we do look at the framework and we do look for the assurance, as Liam has just said, and we do have discussion and debate around those points. So the only thing I wanted to say was, if we are going to look at changing that, then we come back to the thing of, well, what role does the committee have? What is the delegation from the board to the committee? Because you would be duplicating, I think. And the other thing, just finally, sorry, I was at F&P last week, and we had that very conversation, you know, around these risks are owned by Quest and they are owned by Quest. However, we discuss those risks in other committees. I sit on P&C, I sit on F&P, and those risks are consistently discussed there because of their significance and the fact that there is recognition. It cuts across everything that we do in the organisation.
Yeah, that plays to the point you made that far more articulately than I did, but it's exactly my.
Sorry, Chair.
And it might be, no, and it might well be that Jason and the team come back and are comfortable. And you know, given what Liam has just said and you just said, understanding Martin's point, then maybe we have got a system that works for this organisation. And the amount of work, as Liam said, that goes on behind the scenes with regard to those two particular risks, I know is quite significant. Very last word.
Two very quick points. So on that last conversation, I think that we did have something from an Audit Wales report on triangulating those risks more. So maybe there's something in that might help. And then my other point was on risk 557. So this is around the impact of services as a result of industrial action. And I wonder whether we've captured the risk in this framework on the risk to other priorities. Lee mentioned it a couple of times today. So the rest of the transformational agenda. Apologies if I've missed it, but it's not jumped out to me. Should we add it?
Something to look at.
Well, I'll defer to the risk owner. I think is probably more appropriate in that case. But certainly this is a new risk, and if we need to make any changes to the risk descriptor, we can look at doing that and taking those comments in the next round of reviews.
Just to absolutely agree. You know, it's developing as we're going at the moment, and it's becoming more nuanced. So I absolutely agree, Kerry. It needs perhaps a little bit more meat around the bones on it.
Thank you very much. Any other burning points now, ladies and gentlemen? Great. Well, thank you very much. It's really useful as always. Item 11, Rachel, is the monthly integrated quality and performance report.
Thank you. So I know you want to try and catch up a little bit of
and
time. Is that what
we have the AAA report is there, and I think, isn't it? And it draws out some of the issues. And some of the issues I think we touched on the board development yesterday anyway. So anyway, over to you.
Yeah, and I think that's what I was going to say really, that I think we've covered a fair amount of what is in the monthly performance report, which is mostly the December data. This round has gone to various of the committees as well. So we've had a discussion at the committees that have been held more recently. Things have changed and moved on in the January, as we also talked about. There are a couple of good news things in here, perhaps just to pull out. So I was just going to pull out the consultant close rate. So that was at 14.6% in December. And that, we'd set ourselves a target to get to 15% in December. So I think that's pretty near as damn it, as they say. And I think it's real credit to the team in that department for a huge amount of work to try and make sense of what's the new department like now. It's a doubled in size, and the very different functions that team performs. So all credit to them. And there's a bit more detail in some of the in the slides in terms of some of the detail of what sits behind that consultant close rate, what happens to those patients, those people who are interested in that. In terms of it reports, relatively good news in terms of the November managing attendance. So if you're looking at our staff, but we do know that I think we'll when we get the December figures, will show a worsened picture slightly, as I guess we'd normally expect in a December anyway. So we're continuing through the managing attendance programme now to continue the kind of trajectory downwards as we were previously reporting. But good news on the PADRs, which continue to look like so from a people perspective, I think there's some good work there as well. I mentioned, and I think it's just probably I just did want to mention we've got a slide in there now because we said as a board we wanted some metrics around equality and diversity. At the moment, it's quite basic. I think we've got some data on age profiles and gender mix. That's not really the sort of thing that tells us much about equality and diversity and inclusion. So Angela and I have been talking about how we can perhaps get one or two indicators that are a bit more meaningful, and link that perhaps into the culture indicators as well. But other than that, as you say, Chair, people hopefully had a chance to read the report and happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you. Looking around, Bethan.
Thank you, Chair. 2 points or questions from me, please. The first is around the joint investigation framework, previously Appendix B, and I can see Liam nodding ready to answer before I've asked the question. Just how is that working under the new system now?
So coincidentally, we had a review of the joint investigation framework yesterday at an all Wales level, and I think it is fair to say that in large part across Wales we are seeing some really good work going on between ourselves and health boards, a much greater understanding at a pathway level about the impact of delays and transfers. So some of the health boards are genuinely getting back into primary care and understanding what's gone on for the patient at a primary care level, but also thinking a little bit about their back doors and how that works. We've done a reasonable amount of work with some of the health boards in opening up access to information earlier. So when you look in the integrated report, there's often a number of reported incidents that are deemed to be catastrophic or significant, which then over time drops back down as we do the investigations and validate the position. What we're now beginning to see is with some of our health board colleagues, we're able to reduce that risk earlier in the process. So we're able to see the outcome at an earlier stage in the investigation process and get a better sense of the impact on the individual patient. I think there are a couple of areas where we need to do more work, and there is definitely more progress that we can make, and that was explicitly talked about yesterday. What was assuring to me in a number of health boards was the direct relationship at a health board level between what the investigations were finding as a result of the incidents and how it was influencing their 6 goals work. So specifically around end-of-life care and falls, there were the kind of root cause analysis were going straight into 6 goals and becoming the case studies for improvement. within their local 6 goals work. So that was really assuring to hear. The 2 areas where I continue to push quite hard at an all Wales level is in the data solution and the need for us to have a single module that allows for serious investigations, serious incident investigations across Wales, for information exchange and for visibility. That continues to require attention. And I think it's also the case that we need to be clearer in our all Wales positioning of the number of incidents that are still outstanding for investigation. What does the tail look like, and what's the closure for the tail, particularly the legacy incidents? There was a commitment yesterday that all legacy incidents will be closed by April 23. There was, but there's something around the performance data that we are able to take from that data solution at a WAST level, but also at an all Wales level. So I think we've made some good progress, and I think for me the really important measure yesterday was that the conversation was across all partners, positive and in good spirit. And when I joined, the Appendix B process was at times a little bit less comfortable. So I think we've all moved on together, and it has a truly pathway, patient orientated feel rather than an organizational feel. So good progress, more to do, but good progress.
And you get a sense that there's collaborative ownership now of that process, because that was a concern in the past, wasn't it?
Yes. So in large part, I won't say for everywhere, but in large part across Wales, it truly feels collaborative. Our teams have changed the way they're working. They've changed the way they're sharing information, and their identification of those incidents that are national reportable incidents is much more consistent between them. And actually the NRI is less the focus, as is what do we need to learn from this? And I think there's in a number of areas across Wales that has been the case.
Great, thank you.
There was just one very quick
Yes.
thing then, and that's to do with, this is for NEDs who are not part of Quest or finance performance, I guess. The response rate for complaints has dropped very, very low. But I just wanted to reassure other people that are not on those committees. We've had very detailed discussions about that. Officers are on it. There's investment being made, and we have a plan in place to make the improvements.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Chair.
Okay, great. So we've considered December. I think given the discussion, we've got the assurance that we need there. The scrutiny and assurance, Beth, and the committees are clearly into that, aren't they? And then I think Liam, from I don't know whether I'd call it remedial action, but that collaborative approach, I think we need to keep. The board needs to be assured about progress in that as we go on. Okay, great. Thank you, Rachel. Okay, Chris, financial performance month 9. Again, we had something of a discussion yesterday around performance, finance, and some of the issues and challenges. But over to you.
Thank you, Kevin. Just a few quick points to draw up from me to draw up for the paper. I'll take the paper as read. It is based on and builds on a presentation that FMP had last week as well. So FMP colleagues would have seen some of this ahead of the paper. Continued good financial performance. Our track record remains. We're balanced in month. We've been balanced month on month for a number of years now. Continued in month 9 and planned and forecast to do so through to the end of this financial year. As you would expect, as we get into the last quarter, but at the business end of the financial year, if you like, some of the risks we previously articulated, and we did have some risks in the plan this year, clearly, they started to reduce. As you would expect, they either been managed or they're or mitigated, or they haven't fully materialized. Now, they will further drop in month 10, just what I know now in terms of what I've seen come through in month 10, including further funding confirmations on some of the costs that we're assuming to be covered by Welsh Government. There is a bit more of an update this time on the capital programme for 22-23, because we haven't probably brought an update through
quite as often this year on some of that, given the level of funding that we have available to us. But it does paper does identify how any variations to that programme that have emerged through the year plan to be sort of managed now over the financial year end in the usual way. And the last thing, just to pick up your point there, Kevin, and as you say, we did discuss some of this yesterday. I can't at this point of the year now have a financial paper without at least making some reference to next year beyond. This paper focuses on the current financial year and the current performance. But as we know, we're obviously significantly planning for next year as well. That's an iterative plan. It's in development. It's still a work in progress. We have a challenging financial plan for next year alongside many others. Trust board members, as you say, yesterday, and no doubt again further later today, we'll receive updates on where we are with the current assumptions and negotiations that are ongoing with Welsh Government and our commissioners to confirm our funding levels, and also to firm up further estimates in terms of costs for next year, with the hope of still being able to bring a plan through to board in March that will be able to be approved alongside the IMTP. But obviously some way to go between now and then. And that was all I was going to add to the paper, Chair, if that's okay.
Thanks, Chris. Any? It's usual at this time of year that we're kind of resigned to the facts and figures as they are, isn't it? So, Damon.
Just a small one, Chris. It was just in relation to item 12.1 on page 3. It's just mentioning holiday pay on overtime. Is that overtime on holiday pay? The other way, just so it's not misinterpreted.
It's the Flowers case.
Yeah, so it's over.
Yes, yeah, it's
overtime on holiday pay.
It's
not
over.
holiday
It's
pay
over
on overtime, because I wouldn't like the staff to think they're going to get holiday pay on top
No,
of
no, no,
overtime.
No, it's
the confusion.
It's the ongoing Flowers case. Yeah, terminology may have sort of got a bit muddled. It's been there a long time. It's probably lost in memory, isn't it? But but yes, it's that issue.
Thank you.
Yeah. Cheers.
Thanks for that. Okay, so that takes. We did have a break a little while ago. If colleagues are comfortable to carry on, we could do that. But if we need to have a break, please say. Are we happy to carry on? I'm seeing lots of nodding. Great. Okay. Rachel, back to you. IMTP.
Thank you. And this is again a paper that has been to Finance and Performance Committee, whenever that was. It didn't seem that long ago. And I'm sorry, I'm just moved on so quickly there. I'm just getting my paper up.
All right.
That's fine. Yeah. So this is a paper that, as I went to F&P at its last meeting. It's our standard report, which tells us how we're doing in terms of this year's IMTP progress. And the format of it is slightly different. We've got a new head of transformation who's tried to, as well as keep that sense of a RAG rating, so we're clear about, that things are completed on track or slightly off track. We've also got a bit more of a sense in this report now of the progress from quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, so you can see as a board and as a committee a progress towards achievement. So we're pretty pleased. I think the items that are read are items that we have known about and have talked about in other settings. And the only thing really, I suppose, we flagged in finance performance, which I wanted to just pull out, was that as part of a recognition of the ongoing pressures, and we just talked about a huge amount of work in planning for the industrial action days. We have, as an exec team, looked at a reduced set of priorities for the last quarter of the year. And what that means is that there are likely to be things we said we'd do as part of the IMTP that we won't get to now in quarter 4. So some more items are likely to be off track by the end of quarter 4. The areas that we said we wanted to continue to work on was all the actions to reduce harm, trying, supporting and sustaining our one service, industrial action. I can't remember the other 2 now. As I started that list,
financial
that was
sustainability.
Financial sustainability and one other,
Recruitment.
And recruitment. Thank you. So those are the key areas that as an exec team, as an organisation, we're focusing on. So other things may slow down as a result of that focus. But as always, I think I'm pleased with the progress that's been made, and through the transformation programs that we've got really good sense of people coming together and working through and delivering on a lot of our ambitions, which is great. So that's it. That's all I want to.
Thanks very much.
That's all right, Chair.
Yeah, and I know F&P are into the detail of that particular area as well. Is there anything you wanted to add, Joga?
No, I mean, I've covered it from the
yeah.
But as Rachel and actually, as Chris said over the reports, we did go to a lot of the detail during the committee meetings to give the assurance of where they are. We were very pleased with the new reporting format as well. I think that was easier for everyone there. It's a lot of information, visual, the way it was presented is easy to understand. So yeah, nothing further at this stage, but we've covered off on the AAA as well.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much. So we're asked to note the update against the IMTP and the overall delivery, and I think we can certainly note where we are at the moment. And I guess the next item, Rachel, plays into that as well.
Starts to look forward then,
and it is again for colleagues that weren't at board development yesterday. Will be new information or newish, whereas those of us that were there yesterday. Great. Okay. Over to you again.
So I think we're sharing. I think again that the email came round.
Everybody should have the email, and hopefully it's on.
So I think Alex is going to give. Are you going to share with me somehow, so I can? No, I need to see where. Yeah. Okay. We'll do it that way then. Thank you. Right. Let's just get it up. Right. Okay. So next slide. Thank you. So this is a presentation which hopefully won't be too long. Many of us were in board development session yesterday. We were able to spend a bit longer on it, but it's the opportunity to just take a little bit of time to reflect on where we got to with developing our plan for next year. As always, there is a requirement to develop a plan. This year it's by the end of March, the 31st of March, that we're due to submit that. And the first couple of slides really just look at all of the influences on our plan, the things that we need to take into account. The first is that we don't live in a bubble. We're part of a system, and that system includes our commissioners who set out commissioning intentions for us. At a Welsh Government level, we have the 6 Goals programme concentrating on urgent and emergency care. They themselves have got a series of actions and priorities. The Minister has set out a series of priorities for us within the health and care sector, specifically focused predominantly on this coming year. And that's all set in the context of the strategy for health and care in Wales, which is called A Healthier Wales, which has been around for a few years now, but is still the current strategy. Go to the next slide. So just very quickly, I think it's important to note that the Minister has tried to slim down her set of priorities for the coming year. They're still quite broad. So we have there delayed transfers of care, access to primary care, urgent and emergency care, planned care, cancer, and mental health and CAMS. And underneath each of those priorities are 2 or 3 areas of focus. So particularly within the urgent and emergency care section of her priorities list, it mentions the need to reduce handover delays from an ambulance perspective, and it also really focuses on the development of same-day emergency care centres and for health boards to really embed those and make them work well. So it's important that we note that. Go to the next slide. Just touching very briefly on our commissioners and where we are with them. We had a session at EASC last week who are our commissioners for the EMS service and our ambulance care service. At a national level, they have a series of commissioning intentions which aren't that different to those which have been there last year. So the direction of travel remains the same. They're still looking, they talk about shift left in terms of the 5-step pathway. We remember that they developed some years ago. But what we did see at the East meeting last week was perhaps an increased emphasis coming into next year now on some trajectories, not just for us, but for health boards as well, some performance targets and a sense of, where they would want to see us get to by the end of the year, which we haven't agreed to formally as an organisation. We're working through, what is possible, what do we think we can achieve in the next year. And that national commissioning intent is supplemented then by a local series of action plans with our health board. So there's going to be one action plan with each health board, an integrated commissioning action plan they're called. There's a recognition, I think, by our Chief Ambulance Service Commissioner that may be the space where we can innovate and start to develop, some of the inverted triangle solutions, particularly where we're looking at pathway work and that kind of integrated work with health boards, because each health board's in a slightly different place. So there's a recognition that it's not always a once for Wales approach. There may be nuances and slight differences in health board areas. So we're working with the commissioners and the health boards now to develop those local plans. We move to the next slide, please. From a 111 perspective, with the completion of the rollout, we've now got in place, and I've got here just a brief slide which shows the structure of how commissioning will happen for us in the 111 space, certainly on an interim basis. So that we re-established the 111 board, and underneath that will sit a 111 commissioning board, which a number of us as directors will sit on, with formal kind of performance groups sitting underneath that, and a finance group. That setup is going to develop a proper commissioning framework, more in line with what we see through the EASC mechanism. So pushing for the idea of a resource allocation instead of a spend and recover process. They've already set us a number of priorities, or set out a number of priorities, which are largely consistent with what we were expecting to want to be pushing forward ourselves. So more robust arrangements arising in that setting, which is good. We have the next one. Just very quickly, in terms of, when you see the final plan and when it goes through the committees now, over the next couple of months, you'll see how we've been trying to listen to what our patients, our communities and our staff have been saying through the year. In terms of staff, I just wanted to draw out that actually we've had quite a lot of good opportunities this year through roadshows, but also, interestingly, through industrial action. As Angie, you said, as an exec team, we've been trying very hard to be visible during those strike days. So all of the strike days, we've been out visiting people on the picket lines or in the departments. It's given us a great opportunity to see frontline staff and listen to some of their issues, and we want to bring that forward and through into the plan. Next slide, please. And then just to note that, supplementing all of that, as we've just been through now in board, we look at the data. We've got a lot of data. We know what the kind of high level metrics are that we focus on. So we've got a sense through that where we want to continue our focus moving forward. And lastly, just in terms of development, the kind of shaping our plan in the next slide, we've got this. We're not starting from scratch. This is a plan which builds on every IMTP we've had for the last few years. We have our long-term strategy framework. We've developed this year a sense of our purpose, still to be finally launched, actually, in terms of finally the final nuance of that. We need to go back out to start just to get that finalised, which we need to do quickly. But I just want to give the sense of that this is, this is not a new plan. It's an iteration and a building on, growing from where we come from. So bearing all that in mind, if we move to the next slide, please, what we're trying to do this year is to try and simplify the plan a little bit. Sometimes it's, particularly when it's a plan that's read by staff or by the public or even by our stakeholders, it can be complex, too much in there perhaps. We want to try and say, let's focus on these three areas. What are we going to do to improve the quality of the service that we provide to our patients? How are we going to improve the experience of our people as they work with us? And we know there's done around value and sustainability. So from a financial perspective, we know that that's going to be probably a bigger part of what we need to concentrate on next year than perhaps in previous years, underpinned by all of that, or none of it can be done in isolation. We have to work in partnership with people across the system in all of those three areas. So just very quickly, I've just got a couple of slides on what's emerging as the kind of some of the things we'll be doing, particularly in terms of our services. So when we think about our 111 service, on the left-hand side there, what is it we're trying? What are the outcomes we're trying to get? What are we continually trying to build on? We want to get more people. People's needs met digitally through our 111 digital side. We know when you look at the data, we need to improve the experience of patients who do need to ring 111 in terms of how quickly we're able to answer their call, how quickly we're able to ring them back. We want to be able to get them to the right service with as few handoffs as possible. And potentially, as we grow, particularly our clinical teams, but as we introduce Salus as well, how do we meet our patients' needs without the need for a further assessment or a further referral on? So that's what we're trying to get to and achieve. So we're going to be concentrating this year on recruiting and retaining. Retaining is a really important part, the right numbers of staff, and looking to deploying them in such a way that we match when the calls are coming in with our capacity. We know we're growing and developing the clinical leadership of that service. We've done quite a lot of work on that this year, but we need to continue that work, and particularly thinking about this is an emerging area, and our CSD actually, in terms of a remote clinical assessment. That idea of those clinicians almost having a new specialty that we need to develop them in, and actually that's not just for us. That's something nationally that people are working on. We've particularly pulled out that we need to do better, perhaps for people with urgent dental or palliative care needs. How do we move them quickly to, the appointments or the support that they need? Similarly, our commissioners have said they're very keen to think about how we get direct access into things like the same-day emergency care services or urgent primary care centres during the daytime hours. There's going to be work on our service model and our workforce model. We've got quite a high ratio of clinicians to call handlers. That's something that through the Adastra outage earlier in the year, we've learned from, how we might be able to do things differently. And the last bullet point there, obviously, that a big piece of work in terms of implementing Salus that we'll continue to work on next year. Moving to the next slide, just briefly in terms of our 999 service, there's obviously what we're looking for is, we just talked about, we've got to try and get to patients in a timely manner, and we want to as well look at the clinical outcomes, so our ROSC rates, and we've got a range of clinical indicators that we look at boards. We want to see what we can do for patients remotely. So what that growth in our clinical support desk, those clinicians that sit there, how can we support them to meet patients' needs without the need for a face-to-face assessment? That's our consultant close rates. How do we support our staff who do see people face-to-face, and how to treat them on scene to finish the episodes of care at that point? And then for patients who do need to go on to for a further assessment, we know that there are alternatives to ED. ED is not the right place for a lot of those patients. So how do we increase the numbers who are able to get to those better services other than ED where that's appropriate. So again, just in terms of some of the emerging things there, we're trying to secure the funding for our additional frontline staff and potentially to look for additional funding to support the full rollout of our Charu service, because that frontline capacity is critical to getting to patients in a timely way. Work with our health boards on those pathways. We were just talking to Andy earlier. We've got at the moment quite low levels of patients who actually get referred into SDEC from our service. In fact, it's extremely low. And Andy's team have just done some work on what could be possible, the level of patients who could go to that alternative service very appropriately and actually would have their needs met better. So we'll be using that data that we've got now to work with health boards to look at the opportunities to make big strides there. We've got various things we want to do in terms of improving and developing opportunities for lots of our workforce, our technician workforce, our advanced practitioners, and so we talked about the clinical service desk. And sticking on the clinical service desk, we're particularly keen to, I think, develop the clinical leadership for that team as well. We've done well in the one-on-one space, more to do for our remote clinicians in the CSD space. And some of the and then while this is all building towards our ambition in terms of inverting the triangle, that programme of work still has a lot more to do, and so that programme to really flip our service on its head, making sure we've got the right resource to get to the people who need it very quickly, and perhaps then meeting people's needs differently for other groups of our callers. And we, I put in here that one of the things that's going to be crucial in that journey is the use of our own data, and Jason was mentioning it earlier, that EPCR, that clinical rich data is going to be really helpful in knowing where we're going with that. But also, and Liam has talked about this a lot, it's something we need to link with our health boards. We need to get that pathway and that sense of, it's not just our patients and our little bit of the pathway, it's the whole linked data that we need to get better on and move on. Very quickly then, in terms of ambulance care, here, our indicators mostly are kind of time-based indicators. Are we picking people up and dropping people off at the right time? We do quite well actually on that, but there is ongoing work to particularly, we've got some work around the rostering of our NEP service, and for the ambulance care department service, which includes NEPs and UCS, we are trying to work on how to develop a transfer and discharge service model like we have in Iron Bevan, one that we could then perhaps move out to the rest of Wales. So that has been probably a bit slower this year, that we haven't got as far as we'd have wanted on that this year. So we want to try and push forward, because that helps system flow, that helps hospitals to move people out the back end, to move people from place to place, and it helps them then to enable our 909 callers to get in as well. So I mentioned, I'm not going to talk about this a huge amount, but we mentioned that making workplace experience is going to be is one of the three kind of big pillars we want to concentrate on, and Angie's team of trying to frame that bit of the INTP, and what are we doing about culture? What are we doing about the capacity within the organisation? What are we doing about enhancing and providing increased capability for managers, leaders, frontline staff? And in particular, what we're going to try and do, and you'll see in the eventual product, is to pick out from all the information we've heard from our frontline staff in particular, what are some specifics that we could really focus on next year that would make people's working day feel better. Some of that is getting the basics right, it's on this slide, and some of it's around improving the working environment for people. But we want to pick out some particular examples of that, and hopefully when we see the final document, you'll see that coming through. I touched on value and sustainability programme. Chris and Angie are leading that piece of work, and that is kind of work in progress, and I'm sure more will come back in due course on that, so I won't spend much time on that today. Where we've got to, there's a lot of detailed work that sits underneath this. We've got minimum data sets, we've got the narrative document itself to write, we've got templates to be completed, and all of that is ongoing with colleagues from across the organisation. So we'd be hoping to have a first draft now in the next couple of weeks, which will then start to run through into the committees to look at. There are risks. If we can move on to the next slide, we know we're in difficult, the whole of NHS Wales is in a difficult financial position. So that is going to be a challenge for us as we try to, as we have done for the last 7 years, actually develop a balanced financial plan. How do we continue to improve services within the resources that we have available? But we know there's going to be perhaps more tensions this year. How do we manage to continue that forward look and moving towards our strategic ambition when we know there are short-term things that we're going to have to concentrate potentially industrial action maybe going forward into next year. So there's going to be a lot of things that pull us to the short term when we want to be looking towards the longer term. And just the last bullet point there is just to note that there's a review of the commissioning infrastructure going on at the moment. So despite what I said earlier about, we've got some clear commissioning structures at the moment, that may change going into next year, which just brings some potential risks around what that might mean for us. So I think I just pause there. As I say, it's end of March is the date for the final submission, and I think our board is on the 30th of March, so we'll have plenty of opportunities in the next couple of months now to look at the actual plans as they come through.
And there certainly will be a need to be very close to it
Yes.
as we get to that crunch date because of the challenges that you articulate. I'm conscious that those of us that were at board development yesterday saw that presentation in detail, and we did have quite a discussion around the areas that Rachel's highlighted today. Is there anyone that wasn't there yesterday that perhaps wants to ask a question, make a point, bring anything up? Martin.
Yeah, very briefly. It's an excellent presentation, and I was really pleased to see the focus of it. The one question I have, though, a lot of what we want to do relies significantly on the agreement of the trust to change the way they do things. We talk about the shift left. And I'm wondering if there needs to be something in there about collaboration and about partnerships and about testing things out with our partners. In other words, it's how do you do some of this? Because it's not all in our gift. That's the thing that I know when I look at it, I think this is terrific, but we can't do it without the support of particularly the hospital trusts or the trust running hospitals.
So we've got, I don't know, there's a couple. So we've got an engagement framework discussion coming up, which is partly about that. How do we engage with a range of stakeholders, of which health boards is one. I mean, others may answer as well, but I do think the ICAPs, these integrated commissioning action plans, are an opportunity at a health board level to. So if I give an example, we through it's a kind of not such a good process, but that process of collaboration, the advanced practice paramedic navigator trials have happened this year. So it's actually kind of an idea that we haven't particularly had as an organisation. It's come from those joint discussions with health boards at a local level, trialling something out in 2 patches. That potentially may evaluate well, and it's something then we could grow. But that is a good example of that local discussion, local engagement. What's going to work well in this patch?
It's encouraging to hear all that, but would you see it being a factor or a feature in the IMTP itself?
I was saying yesterday, and I took out a couple of the slides just for ease of speed today, but there will definitely need to be a section on partnerships and how we turn some of that into reality with partnerships, as well as digital you know, there's other, we can't forget that there's other requirements and responsibilities on us as an organisation which we'll have to allude to, but partnership will definitely be there. Yeah.
And there are all the Pan Wales networks of very, I mean, Liam just mentioned what he's involved with earlier.
Yes.
You know, there are similar for practically, well, lots of people around the table here in order to try and get into that influencing space, but it's a point well made. Andy?
I mean, it's kind of been touched upon a little bit on this, Chair, but I think, you know, some of the networks we've got there, I'm thinking of the CPAC for the 6 schools, as for instance, as Rachel kind of touched upon, the bit we've been doing around chest pains and which chest pains might be suitable to be managed differently to ambulance and what might be managed remotely. That group that's chaired by Andrew Havers from Welsh Government, extremely interested in that, and you know, so it's that linking of the bit what we're doing in terms of that the clinical information we can draw from EPCR and then feed it to our partners across the health economy to say, look at the opportunity we have here if we collaborate. Like it's a great deal of interest in that regard. And finally, as Rachel touched upon as well, you know, the report we got through around the opportunity around SDEC, where we have a really low referral rate into SDEC now for a variety of reasons. Again, using EPCR data and mapping across that criteria that we worked on prior to the introduction of SDEC about referral from the ambulance service into SDEC and what that potential is versus where we are now. Again, is something that's going to give us real leverage to get into that and do the very kind of influencing that Marty's touching on.
And I think there's something about generalising successful pilots as well.
Oh yeah,
you know, that is opportunity after opportunity across the board. Okay, Rachel, thank you very much. So that's kind of 2 days of discussion around that area, but that was new information then, so that's really, really useful. Estelle, the engagement framework delivery plan.
And this paper really pulls together a few threads that we've already touched on this morning, I think. So we've touched on the importance of relationships. We've touched on just through Martin there on partnerships, and also on reputational risk. All those we've talked about this morning. So this paper is a follow-on from the engagement framework that colleagues approved at board back in July. It's taken me some time to pull this delivery plan together for reasons that will become evident. But what it seeks to do is not to document every piece of engagement that we're likely to do, either have done or are likely to do next year. It is not about business as usual. That business as usual work will continue. This is specifically around how do we engage on our longer term ambitions, particularly as they relate to EMS. So in effect, the inverting the triangles work. Clearly, I've split this down into audiences and time frames, but just picking up Martin's point there from the last conversation, what is very evident is there will be key stakeholders without whose support this work will not be able to progress. And therefore, the first wave of engagement, if I can call it that, recognizing that we've had, you know, looser, broader conversations about our direction of travel with our staff and with stakeholders over some time now. The first, if you like, concerted, if I can call it that, chunk of engagement will be with those key stakeholders to test their appetite for what we are proposing, because as you say, Martin, there's so much of this that needs to be done as a system, and we will need a system response to some of the things that we are suggesting. And therefore we need to understand that there is at least support in principle, recognizing what you described earlier as the devil in the detail, Chair. There will be some devil in the detail, but we do need some of that system indicative support. We will then need to broaden those discussions out more broadly to our staff, as well as talking about staff about, you know, culture, the position the organisation is in, and all those other things as we move forward, and then more broadly into the wider population. Clearly, we are governed by regulation, if I can call it that way, best practice in this field. So it's not just a question of, going out and doing it and say, well, that's all fine and dandy and we'll move on. And I've documented in the paper what that regulation is. And now we find ourselves in a slightly different place because of the demise, if I can call it that, of the community health councils at the end of this financial year, and the establishment of Llais, which is Welsh for voice, and will be the citizens' voice body for Wales, which will have a slightly different role in service change. That role is currently, and the guidelines that support that are currently out to consultation. I don't expect any substantive shift from what I've outlined in the paper. But the core difference will be it will no longer be for the successor body of the community health councils to determine what is described as substantial service change. It will be for the health body itself that is proposing that change to determine whether they believe it to be substantial, and therefore to require a more formalised approach to engagement and consultation. But looking at the criteria which are currently indicated for that, it is likely that we may fall into that category. We have engaged the Consultation Institute. Some of you will know them. They are a national body that are the gurus, if I can put it that way, in public consultation. And they are supporting us both in terms of sense checking what we are proposing, and will be able to provide assurance to the board and others that what we are proposing and how we conduct engagement is in line with our responsibilities and is not way off the mark, recognising that if we take engagement and consultation to its end point and come to a decision about a substantive change in the way we deliver services, then those decisions are often vulnerable to judicial review if process hasn't been followed. So judicial review is never about the decision. It's not a question of I don't like the decision. It's about which process did you follow to arrive at that decision, and was it sufficiently robust? So in the sense of what you have in front of you today, it's a very high level document. It doesn't specify, where and how we will engage in terms of a timetable. It talks much more broadly about the audiences, the messages, what we're trying to achieve, and the timetabling. Given where we are with all the pressures and issues that we've discussed this morning, I will be suggesting a slight change to the recommendations, Chair. So the recommendations as they currently stand, the first one I think is what I'm absolutely looking for from board today, which is an approval in principle to that sort of direction of travel and the principles therein. The second recommendation will be slightly altered, if I may, to remit further development of the plan, the resources that will be required, the timelines to EMT, to Executive Management Team for further consideration, and then onward to People and Culture Committee to be updated on progress. The reason I say that is, and I hope I've made this clear in the paper, this is a very significant piece of work for this organisation if we are to do it properly. It will require significant investment of our biggest enemy, which is time, and resources, largely in the shape of people. So there are some discussions that we need to have at executive management team level about timing, and about those resources that we are going to need. Plus we will this paper is currently going to go to the Consultation Institute for their review. So again, there may be feedback that comes from there. So those timings that you see in the supporting papers may be subject to change. I've said they're indicative rather than definitive. But I hope it gives you a flavour of the extent of the work that is likely to be involved. It actually, in this iteration, looks like a 2-year process that would take us to a board decision 2 years hence. recognising that the wheels don't always grind as fast as we would want. But clearly we could condense some of those timelines depending on need, depending on support, depending on resources. So this is a sort of conservative, we're going to put a small c, obviously, a conservative estimate of time. So I'll stop there. Very happy to take questions, Chair.
So complex indeed. And it wouldn't be Wales if we didn't have committees, subcommittees, groups, forums. So the engagement landscape is even more complex, I think, isn't it? You answered one of my questions because I was going to ask you, where do you see the governance route through for this work? So P&C seems logical to me, but colleagues might have suggestions. But those two things were just observations, really, and there was a question. So, Kerry, I saw you, Bethan, and Martin. Okay, and we are kind of tight for time. So, oh, and Joga. Okay, right.
Okay, so firstly, I'd just like to say thank you. I think it's a great, it's great progress in terms of the conversations we've had so far. For me, it feels like there's a real tension around our transformation agenda, listening to our stakeholders and responding in that whole 2-year period. So we're pushing forward quite rightly on some of those transformation areas. So how we manage that tension and that we do this well and we respond in a way that is appropriate to the feedback we've had. So that's my first point. I think for me, it's really good to see the EQIA in this, both on the process and the outcome. I think that's really important. So then for me, the point around capacity at the moment, based on conversations that we've already had, our ability to do this well. If we're not going to do it well, then I think we should really consider whether or not we should do it. And then my final point is does this fit in people and culture? It feels very strategic. I suppose you could make the argument for it to sit in F&P. I wasn't sure, but I don't have that strong view.
The reason I wanted to know is simply I was thinking it's got to go somewhere, and we'll probably learn something as we go along. So I was comfortable that it would be in one of those committees. That was my kind of take on it. Did you? Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say it is currently firmly in their terms of reference, but I agree. I think as we go through it, there may be some elements that go in different directions as well. But we can't be splitting it. It needs to be going through in a ordered way.
So we've got a route of governance. That's
and historically, Chair, it has in the past, before we had P&C, because we didn't. Kevin will remember this. We didn't have a People and Culture Committee. It did report direct to the board at one point in previous iterations, in previous engagement frameworks.
And I don't think we were comfortable with that, to be honest. That direct route, because
there's no filter anymore.
No, exactly. Bethan.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's a great start, Estelle. The significance of this hits me clearly. And Kerry's raised some of the points in terms of capacity, and I agree. If we're going to do this, it has to be done well. There's more risk to us if we do it and do it badly than not doing it at all. One of the things we discussed yesterday was around our PECI team and their role in engaging with people, etc. And I know for some of us, we were here yesterday, others weren't. So I just wanted to mention it today at Trust Board. There is clearly a role for PECI moving forward in this. But equally, some of the conversations I know you and I touched on, Liam, is about how the role of PECI evolves, grows and develops. And I think it's inevitable that we're going to have to consider those points as part of this. I think it's crucial. So it'll be interesting to see how that develops. And my last point was going to be around the governance. I see that it should sit with P&C, but I also feel that there's some sort of mechanism whereby there needs to be some sort of updates or something to other committees as well. The reason I say that, your report, your delivery plan draws on people like CHC as an example, and the new body as it'll exist. We have those representatives at Quest, patients are a key part of this. So I think perhaps in similar ways to we do with other key topics, there needs to be updates, although the governance route is owned by P&C. I don't know how others feel about that.
And I'm sure that's something that will evolve as this matures. I'm kind of comfortable with it, but I agree completely. You can see how it does that with other.
It's cross-cutting, isn't it? It's
exactly,
everything.
I suspect a number of committee chairs will see more of me than they have before.
Yes, indeed. So Jogger, and then Martin, and then Damon will draw a line underneath this particular
I
item.
think most of my points have been covered. Just on the governance, again, I agree with that approach to evolve. But I think it's a great paper in the sense of what's needed. It's quite ambitious, but I think it's the capacity level. The whole, if we're taking staff away from other areas, is how we resource those other areas, as well as then doing this job properly. And I think that's something that across the board we really need to kind of be kept up to date as part of this, because yes, it's nothing worse than starting this and not being able to kind of deal with it properly or have the capacity. That was the key point there, Chair.
Thanks, Jogger. Martin?
Well, firstly, to say, I think it's an excellent paper. It's an excellent bit of work. There's a lot of thought gone into it. And I have no hesitation in supporting the recommendations. A couple of comments, though. One is, will we be consulting on the problem or the solution? And I'm not suggesting now that you answer that question. I just think it's important that when we consult, that one thing we're doing is getting acceptance that things need to change, rather than saying, here's a solution to a problem you didn't know you had. That comes from my own experience of doing this without establishing that. And the other one is about clinical involvement. Now, it comes back to the partnership issue earlier. And my view here is that people like Brendan and others are much more persuasive than the likes of Rachel and Chris, right? I'm not saying that's not personal, right? But the point being that it's the clinical angle that's much more persuasive in a public environment than anything else. And those two things I just suggest need to be borne in mind. And this is also comes back to the collaboration and partnerships we talked about earlier. My experience, I remember doing this when we were in hospitals, and the worst people in the audience were GPs. They used to come and create holy hell. And the experience we learned from that was to have consultants the other side of the table, and we just sit back, because it was actually a very interesting debate to have in public, an appropriate one, where different clinicians are proposing different views. And I just think it's an important dynamic when we get to the, knocking on, going out and talking to people, that we recognize that who does the consultation is as important as what we're trying to say.
Can I just respond, Chair, briefly on you're absolutely right, Martin. The initial level of engagement is what is the problem we are trying to fix.
Right.
So that is, as you say, we know what some of those problems are, but we can't assume that everybody understands, because we know it's a very complex set of, cogs and wheels that work. So that is the first element of engagement, is what is the problem we're trying to fix. Then we will get through to, okay, so if we accept there's a problem, there are a number of things that we could do about that problem, A, B, and C, let's say. We then talk again about, well, okay, in that A, B, and C mechanism, what do we think is the better of those, or the best of those three options, or indeed is there a fourth option that we haven't thought about, or an amalgam? And you would get to a preferred option that we would test both with ourselves and with those stakeholders, and it would be that preferred option that in 2 years' time, or whenever it is, would come back to this forum for support, recognising we would have had to have tested that with our key stakeholders, back to the people who can make or break us, who will fund us, who will resource us to deliver whatever that option looks like.
They might come to you in a minute, because Jason wants to respond directly to that.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, just to add a couple of thoughts to Martin's comments there. I mean, we do see Martin as, if when we get into this, clinical heavy clinical involvement in the engagement piece with not just communities but stakeholders. You mentioned GPs. We're already talking to GPC Wales with Brendan about some of the thinking we've got about how we emerge from the pandemic and improve access to services. So we will be, there would be a need to have senior clinical involvement in the engagement process, but we are already talking to clinical leaders across the system. You know, Andy, you were talking to the CMO's office yesterday working about this very topic. So senior clinical leaders and various groups have already been engaged, but we will front this very much so with clinicians, because all of the views are going to be important. Just one other thing, if I can, Kevin, just on the preferred option that emerges. Of course, what we do have to do is, whilst there may be a preferred option from the consultation that emerges, that needs to be landed, if I could describe it like that, within resourcing that's available. The Commissioner's view, recognising we are a commission service, and of course the operational deliverability on a national level. And you know, on the one hand, you could see a view that says, I exaggerate for effect here, you know, everyone would like an ambulance on their street corner. Well, that's just not real. So we have to, you know, land the result from the work in reality, in line with operational deliverability, resourcing, and the Commissioner's view. So there's lots of iterations you can see. There's
levels and expectation management.
Yeah,
filtered all through.
Yeah.
Thanks. Damon, last word on this
it's
particular area.
A lot of it's been covered. I was just kind of wondering, in respect of, obviously, the action that's been taken currently is not just about pay. We all know that. It's about the system itself, and whether they would be, as part of trying to resolve the issue at hand, there will be other thought process around this. So the Trust has been quite clear about getting a solution to the problem, as you described. But I'm just wondering whether actually some of the changes that may come as a result of whatever, you know, when this action is finished, it could change the landscape as to what we're doing. And it's about the sort of the timing now, really, because I think, you know, it was absolutely the right thing to be doing. And I'm not saying it isn't the right thing to be doing either. I'm not for 1 second, but actually there could be some, you know, demonstrable changes around the landscape about whether this is actually the right way to go going forward in the future.
And I think that's partially why we need to have further discussion at EMT around timing. Yeah. Staff are going to be critical. I mean, I talked about describing the problem and an acceptance of what's the problem we're trying to fix. You know, your members, our colleagues, are living and breathing what those issues are every day, and they will clearly have views about, you know, what the potential solutions are. But as you say, we're in a complex period, and when we started thinking about this, you know, we weren't in these particularly complex times. But there is going to be an element, I suspect, of it'll be about pace rather than not doing it, because there is something about, you know, we cannot sit in a static state. So some of it will be about timing, about how we do it, and what surrounds that in terms of, you know, what's the mood music almost, because what we don't want to do is add more complexity for our people, but we do need to harness the views of our people in terms of what the long-term solutions are, because these are long-term entrenched issues that we've been facing, and we have to get to a position where we've got a solution that itself has got long-term options to it. I'll keep you posted through WASP as well.
Great, thanks. So we're asked, just check, we're asked, really sneaking in, we're asked to approve the first point there, approve the principles, direction of travel. We're happy with that. The second one, you proposed an amendment. I'm going to suggest that amended form of words comes for minuting so that we can approve that going forward. So I think we can approve it in principle now, but the form of words we can formally approve next time we see the minutes. Is that okay?
I'm slightly.
Or can you and Estelle agree the form of words that Estelle?
I think we have. I think
we sort of got it, Kevin. So it be that second recommendation.
EMT, yeah, further develop the plan and the governance route through P&C.
Yeah, so it would basically say remit to EMT for a more detailed discussion in relation to achievable timelines, resourcing, scope of the delivery plan, and then report that to PCC on next steps following those discussions.
Okay. No.
Very happy.
Right.
Thank you, Chair.
The board secretary is content. Okay.
My work here is done.
Right, yes. Great. Well, thank you very much for that. Now, the next point, Fleur, you're very welcome. It's been a long time since we've seen you in person at the board from Audit Wales. I think most of us have read the report with interest. How do you want to do this? Do you want to sort of talk us through the salient points from your point of view, and then take some comments, questions? Because I think I'm pretty sure there will be some.
Sure.
But that's the nature of audit anyway, isn't it? So over to you.
Lovely, thank you very much, Chair. By a way of short background for those who may not be aware about the structured assessment, it's an annual piece of work that we carry out across all NHS Wales bodies every year. And it's a requirement under the Auditor General Statutory Duties, the Public Audit Wales Act 2004. This year's structured assessment examined progress in several areas, and you'll see from the report that we've grouped those into four distinct headings. So governance, strategic planning, finance, and use of resources, which includes staff wellbeing, digital, and estates. During the course of our fieldwork, we engaged with several members of this board, as well as other senior leaders in the organisation. So I'd just like to take this opportunity, firstly, to thank everyone who input into that process and give your honesty and your experiences. So in terms of the content of the report, I think we'd firstly recognise that the Trust is operating in an extremely challenging environment, which significantly impacts on its services. However, within the four areas of the structured assessment, we generally found really positive progress had been achieved, which you'll find in the details of this report. Some of those key positives I'd like to highlight include our view that the Trust is well led, and that's despite recent changes and some ongoing changes within the leadership. The board is committed to transparency and to hearing the experiences of patients and staff. We noted that despite significant operational challenges, the board continues to focus on its strategic direction, which is something that some of the bodies really struggle with. And it was positive that the Trust continues to develop integrated medium-term plans that achieve Welsh Government approval. The Trust also continues its financial track record of break-even at year-end, has good financial control and effective planning financial monitoring arrangements. We also note that the Trust has shown a commitment to supporting staff wellbeing, to progressing its digital strategy and to improving its estate. There are several other positives within the detail of the report, which I'm sure you'll have seen as well. The report also discusses some more challenging issues for the Trust. Several of these have been formulated into recommendations that you'll see on pages 6 and 7, and the management responses to those recommendations are included within Appendix 2. However, within the detail of the report are some further points that the Trust may also wish to consider, and examples include oversight of delivery of the digital strategy as a whole, and reliance within savings plans on vacancy control, among others. While we would definitely describe this as a positive report with many areas of progress, it also recognises the broader context, which has been the subject of a lot of discussion today, and our overall conclusion points to the need to continue to seek opportunities to influence whole system changes and to increase internal scrutiny to overcome current challenges. I'd just like to say that the board can certainly demonstrate a commitment to influencing the broader system, as evidenced by the discussion today on system pressures and avoidable harm, and on the engagement framework and other discussions. From a structured assessment perspective, we would hope to see that continued regular discussion, along with robust challenge and scrutiny, to review and gain assurance that the significant work that you're doing in this area is achieving the maximum impact that you're hoping to achieve. But just one of the final points, I'd just like to highlight that in clearance, we had discussions with the Trust around concerns on visibility of the delivery plans for the clinical strategy. I've had discussions with Andy on that, and we're quite happy to take that out while we continue those discussions and understand how that process works a little bit more. But for some reason, that still showing in the report. So you'll see that in paragraph 60, that's still included in the heading. That's just an error, and I'll make sure that an updated version is provided to the Trust today. As I said, the management response appears in Appendix 2, and it's positive to note that progress against some of those recommendations have already been achieved and are already underway, including items on today's board, such as discussion on the increased involvement by staff in the IMTP process. And that's all I was going to highlight, but of course happy to take any questions or comments.
Right. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen. Kerry.
Thank you for the report. I find it really helpful, particularly as I'm a new non-executive, or relatively new. So I just wanted to refer to point 23, where I think basically you're saying that non-executive directors, compared to other NHS bodies, are not undertaking the same amount of scrutiny. And this is something I grapple with myself, really. So my observation on this, I suppose, particularly from a committee perspective in Quest and FMP, is there's a real tension here around the pressure in the service, and indeed at times because of the extreme pressure. And this isn't a criticism that, you know, people like Lee may not even be able to attend the meeting. So I acknowledge what you're saying, but from my, I suppose, what have I been around, about 18 months, and that pressure is extreme. So I think there is a need for us to balance that, to ensure that we're acting and scrutinising appropriately. And that's a factor for me. So it's just an observation that I personally wanted to share at this meeting, because I feel it's quite important. But I think it's something that's maybe helpful for us to chat to Colin about as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to just on that point as well, and Fleur and I have picked up a conversation about that, because it's obviously something that I thought would be a point of discussion. And I think there's a couple of things that we can do that were specific to the recommendations around the BAF and what we talked about as far as gaps and actions, and actually looking at that BAF in a bit more detail at committees. And we'll put on some board development around that as well, so that we're positioning everybody, all members of the committee and the board, to be able to ask the assurance questions and the scrutiny questions. And I think there's also something around the tracker as well, around overdue audit recommendations and the level of scrutiny around that. And I think there's also something we can do to simplify that. So I think there's a few very specifics, if I'm right, Fleur, that we can actually address together with the full board, and some process issues that we can help with that.
I come to you now, Martin. I'm just building on that and Kerry's point. So the sort of I suppose the formal observer won't see a lot of the informal stuff that goes on behind the scenes. So we, unlike a number of boards, have a partnering system where a non-exec and an executive are partnered. So it's not that we're into the operational detail, but we have that professional inquisitiveness, and that inquisition, or that sort of, you know, wanting to know a bit more about how things work is already there, because we've been in personal one-to-one conversations around that sort of stuff. So that helps us. And I think it might not look as if we're as you know, as investigative perhaps as on the surface as we are, and I think that really is about the collegiate nature of this board. And a previous Audit Wales report some years ago did note that, I can't remember the exact formal words, but it was something like, the WASP board is collegiate, but everybody knows their place and their function, the non-executives and the executives. And that's why it was deemed to be, you know, an exemplar at that time, but it was a few years ago now. So yeah. I appreciate the changes that have happened, but I think there's a deeper a deeper way that we get assurance that perhaps isn't so obvious. I think that's probably
Absolutely. I mean, if I can just, I absolutely agree with everything you just said. I mean, the buddying system that you use with NEDs and executive directors as well is something that I've always felt is a real strength for the trust, because you do have that ongoing communication that other health boards and other bodies don't do that, and sometimes you can see that quite obviously in the way that their meetings operate. So I think that it's definitely a strength, but as you say, it's just as a formal observer. So yeah, if you come into it, sometimes you wonder, well, with the context, is that challenge and scrutiny happening somewhere I can't see?
No, I understand that. It's just,
yeah, absolutely.
Martin. I don't think this report has been anywhere other than to this meeting today, and I'm hoping we can have an opportunity to discuss this in the audit committee up and coming. Right, well, that's helpful. I think the other point is it does need some discussion with the chairman here, and the reason I say that is that some of your comments I agree with them. I mean, there's one I think you've got, is it number 14? There's scope to strengthen the level of scrutiny and challenge provided by non-executive directors. And then you strengthen that in paragraph 23, which Kerry referred to, where it says that we don't provide the level of scrutiny that you've observed in other trusts. So, I'd like to explore that with you outside this meeting through the audit committee, and maybe we do need a discussion and debate about, this is about the respective roles of the committees and the non-execs and execs. And it is opportune, so I accept, because I actually accept some of those points. It's what we do about them is the difficult thing, and obviously the chief executive needs to consider this as well. But if it's going to the audit committee chairman, maybe we defer a discussion until we've had the opportunity to do that, and maybe bring some recommendations back to this group. And it'll also allow Colin an opportunity to have his full benefit, because he might have a different views about some of this stuff.
Well, he'll have a different lens anyway, won't he?
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. A lot of the comments I was going to make have been made, because the one paragraph that jumped out to me, Fleer, was paragraph 23. And I think the natural thing is to be quite defensive when you read that. And it's really important we don't become defensive and we sit back. Completely support what Martin was saying as chair of audit there, for audit to consider that, and crucial that Colin as the chair is involved in that discussion. And then I think there needs to be broader conversations myself. The one thing I wanted to add to the point that Kerry made was, Kerry talked about there is a balance because of the level of pressure that execs and their teams have been under, and it is phenomenal and it is unprecedented, and that despite the best will in the world or the most competent staff you can recruit, that is going to have a real impact, isn't it? But the second point I wanted to make was, for me, a lot of our biggest challenges and the areas that we would most want to make improvements in to have the impact we want to have and deliver the services we want to deliver for the patients, a lot of those issues are ones beyond our control. And that's the challenge, I think, when you look in as a NED, how do you challenge more strongly? How do you scrutinise? We are very alert to that. We do still have discussions, and I know you've been in some meetings, certainly Quest, Fleer, when we've said, things like, that's maybe true. However, that's having the biggest impact on those areas of performance that we're not content with. However, there are some things we can and we must continue to push forward with internally. And we do have that conversation. And I think we've started to see some progress and some improvements in those areas that are within our gift to improve. So for me, that adds to the complexity of scrutiny and challenge, because a lot of what directly impacts on our ability here, we are reliant on others to play their part who are also under immense pressure, and that's a given. So I'm not passing the buck at all. I'm saying that it's a much more complex system-wide issue, which I think makes some of us stand back a little bit more than we would, because we want to be supportive. There needs to be that healthy tension, that right balance, I think, between support and challenge between a non-exec and an exec. But that support thing, I think, is really important, given the last 2.5, 3 years that we've all been, within, really, working within. Does that make sense, Lead?
Yeah,
is that fair?
Yeah, it does. And yeah, I mean, I don't know if you remember when me and my and the director, Dave Thomas, came in and did a session, didn't we? And I think we talked about the quadrant that we use quite a lot internally, about where boards would position themselves in terms of there's an axis which is around reliance on robust challenge, and then an axis and reliance on relationship, and you've got to find out where you're comfortable in that quadrant, really, around how much supportive is absolutely one of the key strengths that you want to do. And obviously there's a huge level of trust that we can see between the board, which is very helpful to see, but it's just wondering really whether sometimes that reliance on relationships does that open you up to a risk at some points. It's just being very aware of that, I think, and making sure that you do have the assurance that you need as non-executive directors, that whatever actions are being taken either internally or in that external influence sphere are having the impact that, the maximum impact that they can do given the current context. It's a very difficult, as you say, very difficult environment. I understand that completely. And everyone's working really hard to improve it. So I think it's just maintaining that pressure and trying to maximize the value for the impact, for the effort going in. Yeah.
And I think we're taking it in the way it's meant. I don't think there's any and nobody's seeing this as a hugely negative report in any way. I don't think, but there are things that we feel strongly about. I think that's probably where we're coming from. Jason,
a very quick one. Fleur, just remind me, what was the reference period for this? This was what, 4 or 6 months at the beginning of last year, is that right?
We did the fieldwork between about July and September, and it was looking largely at the annual years of 2022, basically as a year.
So July and September 22.
22.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Great. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just an observation, obviously being relatively new to the organisation, since I've joined, I've had individual non-execs messaging me for individual conversations on quite a range of topics, which I would expect, really. And I wasn't sure if that was captured in terms of those, what I call they're not informal, because they're a formal request for a discussion. So were they captured at all, do you think?
That's not something that was raised during those, but we can definitely make sure that we pick that up when we go into the next round.
And it wouldn't have been in the time frame anyway.
No.
But, okay, great. Well, thank you very much. You're very welcome to stay.
That's okay. Yeah.
But if you do want to head off, that's fine as well. So thank you very much. Okay, let's move on to item 17. Trish, the board committee dates.
Yes, Chair, this will be quick, I think. These have been circulated to board members so they can get early sight. There's a few changes that have been made that are set out in the covering paper. Just to note, there's the 5 board development sessions in the year. They'll take place in the alternative month to the board, and I think that will help us to manage non-executive time in particular in a way that's more in keeping with their requirements as well. And all meetings will be held here in Cardiff, but it's going to be complemented with a board visits SOP that will come through by the end of March, which will allow us many more options for board members generally to be going out and visiting staff, whether that's physically or some virtual options as well, and for us to be able to map that visible leadership, and that will come through to board on a regular basis as well. And the only other 2 things is that we'll include the dates of WASP. We've got dates in up until June at this point, so we'll include them in the calendar because it's a board advisory group. And we've got placeholders in May and June for the accounts, but the manual for accounts hasn't been finalised yet, so there'll be some movement in those, but we've put placeholders in for both months. But the dates are here for approval, and the plethora of calendar invites will follow.
Okay, so we're asked to approve the schedule. I think given the sort of diversity we're trying to create with the board, being pragmatic about dates and times and commitments, really important going forward. So look forward to the plethora of calendar invitations. Okay, we're on to board committee reports. Again, if we take them as read, but if colleagues want to bring out anything in particular, then please do. So the first one is you, Martin, the audit committee.
No, I mean, there's no alert there, and the advice is as listed. And the one thing we've just talked about actually is a structured assessment.
Yes. So. Okay. Great. Angie, you were going to talk to the People and Culture Committee.
Only one thing I would just pull out, and that was that reference to the work that we had and really good scrutiny from the committee around exit interviews and retention and the need to really focus on that. So we are completely revamping our approach, the processes, policies, but also stay interviews as well. So we are coming back to the committee next month just to give an update on that. It's just one of the highlights.
Brilliant. And the next one is F&P Jogger.
We covered most of this with the reports from the execs, and the main ones we're going to pull out was the handover delay, which we've seen an improvement, which is good, but it's something that is always a big talking point within the meetings. And then the other one to pull out was the Salas one, where they're still behind schedule, but we just waiting for further assurances. Those are the only two that was going to pull out from the list.
Great, thank you very much. Estelle, you're going to talk to the APC, Academic Partnership Committee.
Yes, very.
Not a great deal.
No, very briefly, Chair. The only thing I would pick out is, given the fact we've had a conversation this morning about the evolution of the next year's IMTP, that we will be reviewing some of the University Trust status priorities in the context of next year's IMTP to see what we roll over and whether there's any taking away or additions.
Great. Thank you very much. So we're on, Trish, to the governance report.
Thanks, Chair. This would normally be in consent items, but as we had a chair's action between board committees, as a chair's action on the 29th of December, it was merely a chair's action to affix the common seal to a lease for property at the Gethley Industrial Estate. So that chair's action was made in accordance with the standing orders, and it's here for ratification today by the board. The other two elements on the report is just a register of the use of the trust seal and bringing in those decisions made in private session on the 24th of November into public.
So we're asked to ratify the chair's action taken on 29th of December and note the use of the trust seal. Great, thank you very much. So we're down to consent items, primarily committee minutes. I would just say, is there anything that we need to bring out here now on any of those? So audit? Nope. P&C? No. Charitable funds? Finance and performance? No. And APC, we've just gone through that. And then the others are for information and standard at this particular time in this open meeting. Okay, remiss of me at the beginning not to thank Anthony and Hannah, our BSL colleagues, for their input today. So thank you very much to both of you for being with us. Is there any other business? We haven't been informed of any other business. No, good. Okay, date and time of the next meeting, Thursday, the 30th of March this year. So presumably here.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, then the last thing to do is to exclude the press and public from the public meeting, the open meeting, and to invite them to leave because the closed meeting will be closed, confidential, and in camera. And thank you very much. There's an acronyms something at the end.
Just for information.
For information. There we are. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Really useful morning. I hope those that followed us externally found it useful as well. And we'll have lunch and open the closed meeting. Thank you.